Greetings, eminent speakers and participants who have joined us today. I, Zarna Shah, Conservation Architect and EPWG e-commerce member, would take this opportunity to welcome you all to the 5th thematic session of the E-Symposium on Intangible Cultural Heritage for Sustainable Management of Historic Towns in South Asia, Theory to Practice. The symposium is organized by the National Scientific Committee on Intangible Cultural Heritage, NSC ICH, and Emerging Professional Working Group e-commerce India, along with the Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, and Department of Architecture, IIT BHU Varanasi as knowledge partners. This e-symposium intends to serve as a platform for sharing and exchange of the ideas that supports the developing insights on the interrelationships between tangible and intangible elements, especially in the context of historic towns and the approaches of good practice in South Asia. Spaced out into 5 thematic sessions, this symposium intends to bring together experts and emerging professionals from South Asia. Today's session focuses on the theme Reflections and Ground Realities, Intangible Cultural Heritage in Historic Towns. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce our eminent speakers. Naveen Piplani is a consultant at Intech Heritage Academy, President of e-commerce India, also Vice President, e-commerce International Training Committee. Niyati Jigyasu is a visiting scholar at the American University of Rome, an independent consultant and researcher, also e-symposium convener and coordinator of the National Scientific Committee on Historic Towns and Villages of India. I'm sorry, I'm just facing some trouble in changing the slides. Dr. Monalisa Bharadwaj. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Dharna, we can hear you.
Sorry. Dr. Monalisa Bharadwaj is an architect, academician, and researcher. She is presently an associate professor at School of Architecture, RIT Bangalore. Sonali Jaiswal is a conservation architect, researcher, and member of e-commerce India and EPWG, and she is a co-founder of Soga Design Studio, Singapore and India. Jyoti Shukla has completed her bachelor's in history from University of Delhi, master's in heritage management from University of Ahmedabad, and she is currently as a heritage manager. Saranya Dashni is the moderator for today, and she is also a conservation architect and professional experienced in India, Cambodia, and UK. She is handling the e-symposium right now, and she is also the national representative of EPWG e-commerce India. Over to you, Saranya. Thank you, everyone.
First, may I invite Naveen Piplani, the e-commerce India president, to
Saranya, I think we lost you. You're on mute.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the e-symposium. May I invite now Mr. Naveen Piplani, the e-commerce India president. The floor is yours, Naveen.
Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to participants at this seminar from various time zones. I'll just take 1 minute as e-commerce India president to say that how incredible this series of e-webinars has been, and looking at the enthusiasm and the rigor with which it has been organized, and participation from all the delegates is nothing less than overwhelming and heartening on such a complicated, complex subject as intangible cultural heritage. So my hearty congratulations to the entire team who put it together so well, and a hearty welcome to all the participants from across the globe who are participating and watching us deliberate over the next couple of hours. And a big thank you, really, people behind the scene who are making it possible that things run smoothly. Now, the subject that I'm going to be speaking about for next 10 minutes is role of ICOMOS India in intangible cultural heritage, ICH, regional and global. I think the fact that this topic is being discussed under the umbrella of ICOMOS is in itself is a great achievement, because of the fact that when ICOMOS was set up in 1965, the focus was mainly monuments and sites, and therefore the name International Council on Monuments and Sites. And it really shows that over the past few decades, the expertise, the experience, and the inputs that have come to ICOMOS, and the diversification of ICOMOS as an organization itself, accommodating and welcoming voices and views from non-Western, or rather non-European parts of the world, have been so welcomed by this wonderful organization. And we have moved into the realm of intangible cultural heritage and all the various aspects associated with it. ICOMOS India, I think, would have a much larger role, the role which will go beyond this webinar. I will only make a few points, but I leave it to the coordinators and people who've conceived it, are running it, to collate all the various suggestions that have come through. ICOMOS India, and India largely, is, I think, is placed at a very pivotal position, pivotal role that we need to play to not only deliberate on the aspects of intangible cultural heritage, but also bring forth the various colorful, diversified, not so known aspects of intangible cultural heritage to not only our region, but also the wider international context. I am in fact very happy to see the experts who are participating today. They actually do represent this diversity and have dealt closely with aspects of intangible cultural heritage, and ICOMOS India playing this umbrella role to bring them together under one platform. So the first thing that I wanted to say was that ICOMOS India will have to play, has started, but it's a long way, and we will have to play a critical role in defining, firstly, and then perhaps redefining the understanding of intangible cultural heritage at the regional level and then at the global level. Because there are definitions which are already there in UNESCO conventions and other documents which are at a larger international context. But this is my personal view, that it is possible that those definitions don't really reflect the complexity and the nuances and the distinctiveness of intangible cultural heritage in certain specific contexts. And this was also the problem with the Venice Charter, because once you start, once you put something on the table and expect that it is going to be universally accepted and universally applied and universally successful, universally understandable, the problem starts to creep in, particularly with the subject of ICH, where it is really the nuances. It is the detail that matters more than the overall presentation or understanding of ICH. So I think we'll have to pick up these definitions which are already there, and then see whether they apply, whether they need any refinement, whether they need major deviations, if you like, at our own local level, regional level, and then perhaps intervene at the larger global level within the broader framework of ICH that ECOMOS as an organization and ISE on ICH provides us. So this is the broad view or perspective that I bring to the table and ask, how can we do it? The next question will be that, well, yeah, this sounds fairly reasonable. Some people may agree, some may throw it out of the window. But for people who agree, the next question would be, how can we do this? And I've got only 5 points to make. The first point is to establish a clear distinction in conceptual terms between tangible and intangible cultural heritage. There's a lot of dust around the understanding of these two aspects that needs to be cleared. Sometimes people even use it interchangeably, or sometimes intangible is used as something that kind of accommodates and incorporates tangible also. And conversely, tangible is used to discount the intangible. And if I am not wrong, and if UK has done it, until the time I was teaching there in 2007, UK had not even signed the Convention on Intangible Cultural Heritage. So, in certain contexts, there could be hard lines between tangible and intangible. In certain contexts, there could be very blurred lines, absolutely going into the areas of gray. So one has to be able to clearly, as a scientific organization, as a body of experts, one should be able to clearly distinguish between either you say this is tangible or this is intangible. The intangible contains certain aspects of tangible, or tangible contains certain more aspects. But one has to have a definition, not to say that intangible cultural heritage means so and so, and you go on and on and on, but a clear conceptual understanding at the scientific and expert level to not be able to make any mistake or error or even confusion in the minds of the general public or people who we are dealing with. So how can we do that? One of the suggestions is identify and map the definitions of ICH, the various definitions which are floating around. Just identify them and map them. Make a catalog of UNESCO says this, ECOMOS says this, somebody else says something else, INTEX says this, etc., etc. We just map the various definitions which are available in different cultural contexts, and particularly in their own languages. Once you change or interpret from French to English, or Spanish to English, or Hindi to English, the crucial aspect of ICH may just get lost there itself. And then if one wants to define it, we've already gone astray. So it would be interesting to see in the various regional languages, various regional approaches, various local dialects, what does this intangible cultural heritage thing mean? What is this? My second proposition is understanding the overlaps. And along with the overlaps, the in-between spaces. So once we say this is tangible, this is intangible, there are certain overlaps. So one has to go to those overlaps. And if we are saying this is tangible and this is intangible, then what happens in the in-between space? So in one proposition, the in-between space already is an overlapping space. So there are aspects from both. But in the other, for use of any better word, gap. So these two different perspectives of looking at the spaces where the notions of tangible and intangible either meet, coexist, or look the other way. These are two different aspects of looking at this concept of tangible and intangible. Now, the suggestion is this can be addressed conceptually and practically with the help of case studies. Because you've got performing artists, you've got people who are carriers of intangible and tangible, people who are working with it on a daily basis. They will be able to tell us where are the overlaps. As experts, we may only be able to, what is the right word? We may be able to convert that into some kind of a shared knowledge base or language that all of us trained in formal structures of heritage studies understand. But actually the nuances will lie in the people who are practicing both of the overlaps and of the non-overlaps. Now, my third proposition is a key question. Where does the living heritage or the living aspect of the tangible and the intangible, or tangible or the intangible, both aspects find place in our discussion? And in a wider international context, there are certain areas which take living heritage as a given. They say, look, this is all we are living it on a daily basis. There is no distinction between monumental, tangible, iconic, etc. We are living it on our at our daily life level. And for certain other contexts, they say, look, what is living heritage? We only have heard of either tangible or intangible, something that can be touched, experienced, felt, etc., something that cannot be touched, felt, experienced, etc. Now, what is this living heritage that you have come about with? So we have to again place it. And some people say, well, craftsmen, when you consider craftsmen under and the craft in the intangible sphere, the living is already built in because he is a craftsman, he is living, he is practicing his craft. So the intangibility of heritage or his craft is the living aspect as well. But I feel there is a little bit of a fine-tuning, refinement. There has to be something we have to work it out. It is lying in that gray. So either you have it or you don't have it, kind of. But I think it needs a little bit of working around. And my suggestion here is that we need to, as E-Commerce India organization, we need to extend our research interests to collaborate with institutions like EPROM, who've run a program on this aspect for several years. We need to collaborate with UNESCO Category 2 centers in this part of the world and in other areas of the world. And also relevant ISCs, not only with ISC on ICH, but ISC on stone, ISC on mural painting, ISC on heritage economics, which is dealing with life, creative economy. So we need to also, make ourselves slightly more transversal and go to these other, have our tentacles go outwards. My fourth proposition is setting out a local, regional, and global discourse. Through this, we have already started it, but I think what it requires is further deliberation, further structuring, further formality to be brought in so that it becomes a discourse. It becomes something to argue about. It becomes something where we come together and have agreements and disagreements in a formal setup and not only listen, absorb, and go away. So a global discourse, at least in this part of the world, regional level could be set up, and its implications for certain key phenomena like climate change. Have we started linking ICH to climate change? Have we started linking ICH to sustainable development goals? And all the goals, does ICH appear or not appear? Rights-based approach, where are those people? Are they connected to us? Traditional knowledge and practices, and importantly, post-COVID scenario, the recovery period, where are these ICH knowledge holders? What has happened to them? Where is a survey on? So there needs to be a global discourse on that. My final proposition is that E-Commerce India, as a network of experts, needs to play a leading role, of course, in the understanding, in the interpretation, in the safeguarding, in the promotion, and in the publishing of whatever we are saying, regionally and globally. We need to set out a clear agenda in the Southeast Asia, and we can even call it the agenda for ICH in South Asia. We need to look at the protection measures, governance systems, community participation, traditional management systems, which are very different from the modern and post-modern management systems, especially the political ones. intellectual property rights of this knowledge, which the knowledge holders have, sustenance and livelihood enhancement of knowledge holders, particularly in a post-COVID scenario, and future of ICH. Well, all this is happening, has happened. So we need to bring all that up to date in a certain form. But then we have to take this global discourse to see where is the future of both ICH and ICH practitioners in India and worldwide. So this is, we tend to focus so much on cultural heritage as a phenomena that we tend to forget the knowledge holders, their families, their larger context, their habitats within which they flourish. So that one aspect also needs to be brought into the global discourse, whether there is a solution to it, whether we are going somewhere with it, whether it is happy, sad, worse, but at least bring it to a level of global discourse, since we are a network of networks and network of professionals. So I leave it at that. These are the few points I thought I will share and put across on the table. I've heard several of the presentations of this webinar, and many experts have already touched upon these points. But what happens is when you speak and you go away and then you get involved in your day job. So it will be the opportunity for E-commerce India, EPWG and E-commerce India NSC to take this learning in some way forward, so that we can set out a clear path and perhaps play a guiding role or a leading role in this field. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naveen. That was very well said, and especially to start off with this, because the next topic is about the conceptualization of this e-symposium, and the many points that you have mentioned and you have discussed about right now is something that we had thought about, and so it's really good to know what is ICH at the regional as well as on the international level, and what are the discussions that is happening right now, especially when we think about ICH. I mean, the community is so important, and the multiculturalism that you touched upon, these are so valuable, and we will definitely take this into consideration, especially when we have the way forward presentation later in the day. The next presentation is going to be by Ms. Niyati Jigyasu. She's going to be presenting about the conceptualization of the e-symposium. Over to you.
I don't know what has happened. It just went off. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Can you see my screen and hear me? Yeah.
Yes, both.
Okay, yeah, okay. So thank you everybody for being here. And yeah, it has been an incredible journey. I think it started in February or something, when we started actually discussing different topics and discussing on the way forward, especially because we had this COVID scenario which was happening. But then knowledge building is something that we always should keep on going, even if we are not going on the site. So this e-symposium was basically the idea that we can at least continue with our journey of building knowledge, sharing knowledge, talking to each other, and continue in a way. So that was basically the aim, and then it slowly started building up of how we go forward for it. So basically, when discussions are about the heritage management of historic areas, especially, we architects are often accused of focusing on the conservation of the built fabric, the visual quality, the aesthetics. My research work in the past few years, basically, though I'm also an architect, so I would be having some biased views during that time. It took me a lot into looking at the kind of ways of intersections, interdependency, associations of the tangible and the intangible, especially when we look at in historic context of historic cities. So, for example, when I was looking at traditional crafts in Jaipur, the intangible aspects of the historic area impact the visual characteristics, it impacts the typology of the urban fabric also, and it impacts the urban planning also, which I also put forward in my presentation also. Yuka Yukalito, he in one of his papers, he quotes Heidegger about a Greek temple, where he says that the physical presence of the temple and the God's image in themselves do not yet assign the significance to the site, but it is a God's presence, the spiritual or the intangible dimension, when evoked, that gives the real meaning. In his conversation with me, that you are going to listen to in some time, he states, and I quote, "The building is a response to the functions. Functions are the intangible." So what we are looking, we basically start looking at that, how these things meet each other at sometimes where they are dependent on each other, how they associate with each other. So today, especially when the increasing approach is on more holistic approach, where we are looking at this living heritage and other approaches in defining heritage sites, and also its subsequent management, it has brought forward the need to consider ICH and its major role. Also, there are aspects of continuity and change that are inherent to the ICH and needs a critical understanding. Though the discussion on ICH has been continuing over the years, we have had 1998 proclamation of the masterpieces of oral and intangible heritage, even though the discussions were happening before that also. Then you have the 2003 conventions for safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage to the historic urban landscape coming up. Then also the living heritage approach, which was propagated by ICROM. So we have been continuing, discussions, but then you still have issues on ground. Though the role of ICH is definitely acknowledged, but on ground, it is not fully understood, especially in the context of tangible, where they, come together with the tangible, in management especially. So hence the need was to actually continue the discussion and exchange of ideas. Such a discussion is very special, especially for e-commerce, like Naveen already mentioned, that because since many of us also come from the architectural background, and it also becomes very legitimate. Yeah.
So, Niyati, may I? Are you changing your screen? Or
no, I'm changing it after slide? This. I'll be changing it after this.
Okay, great.
Yes. So basically, it becomes very legitimate for us to see the ICH within the context of physical. Otherwise, ICH is mostly, seen separate, especially under the convention. And all this basically laid the foundation of this symposium. Also, we had the pluralism of the South Asia, home to ancient civilization with the oldest religious and philosophical traditions in the world, which belies any singular reading of the heritage. It constitutes various groups and regions with overlapping histories and culture, and the notion of heritage is deeply connected with the landscapes, to the rituals and the tradition. So the issue needs to be looked at a regional level. I don't think we can, look in silos, in the sense that India and our neighboring countries will look at things in our own small region, because finally it will be much better to work in trans-regional, which is also what Naveen emphasized just in the next thing in his talk. So that actually led us to, putting down these two questions, though they are very broad questions, and there is a lot which can come within that. But the basic idea was that how do symbiotic associations and multiplicity of values on ground in the context of interrelationship of the tangible and the intangible work in historic cities, and how to augment the role of ICH for sustainable heritage management of historic cities. So these were like the overarching questions which were put forward, and then we started working on, the different themes. Of course, the first theme which came about was basically to start with the very basic, where we start looking at different kind of examples which can actually highlight the intersections and the interdependency between the two elements. The second was, of course, because if you are actually going to look at, management of both of these in historic towns, then you have to look at, the different tools, strategies, approaches, the methods that have been, working so far, or that have been taken care, that have been appreciated, or that have actually created problem also. Because when in this, some of the people also talked about, the problem which the two be having two separate conventions, which has actually led to some of the issues also on ground. So it was a deliberation of, how we are looking at all these and the different approaches that we actually take forward with. The third, of course, was ICH as a driver for tourism, mainly because historic towns are major tourist attractions, but unmanaged tourism or over-commodification of cultural heritage can damage the very resource tourism is dependent on in such places. This brought about the third theme, which was to discuss the fine line between experiential tourism, which is, talked about a lot, and the commodification of culture, and to seek ways to harness the power of tourism to achieve sustainable development goals in which ICH can actually play a pivotal role. To the fourth one, where we finally came down to that there were many debates, around the pros and cons of interpreting heritage as a cultural capital and using heritage as a cultural commodity. But this becomes very, critical, especially when we look at ICH, because as far as tourism is concerned, or even for local purposes concerned, it is actually part of a living culture. And so the economic capital definitely comes into picture every time. So that is why this an important issue in heritage economics came about to distinguish between use and non-use values. Thus, this final session was aimed to discuss the ways in which intangible cultural heritage can be a strong driver for augmentation of economy of historic towns and how this supports their sustainability. As I mentioned that we were talking about regional collaboration, so inclusivity of all the South Asian countries were very important. We had Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. South Asian, 9 experts were there from the panel, and we are very grateful to all of them for participating within. So 9 other than the Indian, because I'm not putting Indian in this thing. For an additional perspective, we also had Yuka, who was from Italy, and we have today Dr. Dennis Rodwell, who is going to be part of the panelists. No knowledge building can happen without institutional partners, especially universities, because they are the biggest source of imparting and spreading knowledge as fast. So we are very grateful because Center for Heritage Management came forward for it, and we had IIT Banaras Hindu University, which came. The other point which was very important was that it was very important that this should not be just something that is discussed as theory only, because the basic point which was there in the title itself was theory to practice. So the idea was to actually get academicians to practitioners to policymakers to policy implementers also. So academics and research-oriented people, because a lot of academics are also actually people who work on ground also. So it's not that they are going to be, but they do a lot of research work on ground, and that is where you actually get a lot of scientific knowledge also from. So, and we had professionals, we had International Institutes for Policies and Guidelines, which is very important for getting an overall perspective. You have international organizations like British Council, who had excellent, work on Durga Puja, and it was very interesting to see the economics of that in that. We had national NGOs also, and we also had national government representatives from India as well as Sri Lanka also. So because it's always, sometimes it also happens that we always say that, at the government level, we are not sure how much actual work is done and what kind of work is done. So there were 2 of these people who actually gave a very interesting perspective on that. Of course, this is ICOMOS initiative, and so we had many participants from the ICOMOS team. So we had total of 15 speakers plus 6 panelists plus 3 moderators, which includes actually people from the other regional context also. And last but not the least, this point sometimes does come into the discussions, especially when you put up posters and other things. So that was also one thing we definitely took care of, that what are the ratio that we are looking at. And yes, we have got much more on the female side. Yeah. I think, and finally, most of the symposiums, we do tend to land up by, we have a discussion and on the various topics, and then it finishes, and like Naveen also mentioned that, then what do we do after that? So the idea was that we also, try to have a reflection, which is actually part of this entire event only. So, and it should not, so it's, we are able to actually look at all the themes which were there before, though we had to, I should also add here that we had to leave out some of them, which included climate change. We were also thinking about risk to ICH, but because these are also certain themes which are, they also needed like an e-symposium in itself. So we thought that maybe, this will be like a startup journey and we would actually take it forward. Also, it was very, very important that you do have experts, but then you also realize that the world keeps on changing nowadays. It's like, the change has become so frequent. So, and then you have a lot of younger professionals who are working, and we have seen the what they can bring to the table as far as, EPWG is concerned, which is basically emerging professionals or younger professionals of the heritage management fraternity. So it was very important that, we have they also coming on the same platform at the same table and trying to discuss together. And that is the very reason why this final session was conceptualized, which basically looks at the reflections and the ground realities. And so we finally landed with 5 of the total sessions. And yeah, so it was basically the underlying line was that it's time to see the container through the contained and not the other way around. E-symposium was definitely there, but the main idea was also to have a publication, because anything which is, there is a publication or there is some kind of a knowledge source which you can actually reach out to. You can look at being a PhD scholar also, you actually start understanding the importance of, how all these knowledge can actually help you over the time. So whether you are a practitioner or even as a theoretician or an academic. So that was very important that we have a publication which actually comes out, which can put all these things for future, for everybody to, just look up on ICOMOS India and take it as a reference. And the last point, which we definitely hope to take forward, was basically understanding the scope of heritage management in South Asia, where we are actually looking at that it's not only about, just talking about our own work and the themes and putting it, but trying to finally come up with some kind of, understanding, which can be a statement, which can be a publication or something, but which basically actually tries to talk about heritage management exactly in South Asia. So which can actually be a good help for all of us for the future. And it would be, a good contribution from ICOMOS India, I think. So thank you so very much for being here. And I hope we have a very interesting session coming up. So thank you so much. Thanks, Aranya.
Thank you very much, Niyati. Wow, I just have to say wow to all the numbers and, the insight that even though, we see a series of webinars happening, but when you put it collectively together and you start seeing these numbers, it just, overwhelms you that so much work has been done, so much understanding for a topic where we started off with 2 questions. We have reached to a certain stage right now. And also, as you mentioned about gender, it's such a very important topic, especially in, conservation. So I think when we are having this discussion about the ground realities, that would be something very interesting to talk about. Thank you very much, Niyati. Next, we have 3 younger professionals. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that because we had the younger professionals and experts, we also wanted somebody who has a very, overarching umbrella, somebody who is more like a textbook to all of us and a living legend. So that is the very reason why Yuka was also brought in, and we are so grateful that, he accepted our invite and, he could say a few words. So I think we did try to cover the maximum ground we could, but it's still just the start of the journey. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Niyati. And we will be seeing the conversation with Yuka in some time. We have 3 young emerging professionals professionals. They are going to be presenting case studies on 3 topics. So we have first Dr. Monalisa Bharadwaj. She will be presenting on the character appraisal for hill stations in South Asia. Over.
Good afternoon, everyone. Allow me 1 minute to share my screen. Saranya, can you confirm if it is on?
Yes, it is on. I can hear you. I can see the screen.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to present my work. I hope this work relates, significantly to the theme today, that is ground realities for intangible cultural heritage in historic towns. Why I think hill stations and character appraisal is a pertinent presentation or a case study is because, first of all, character appraisal, in my understanding, allows to bind the intangible cultural character of historic towns with the physio-spatial built environment when we talk about the context of conservation. And hill stations, why? Because hill stations, everyone would agree that these are very unique settlements, which are a manifestation of, the preferences for a certain intangible cultural preference of a certain global community. And those preferences shaped a very unique built environment, which is unique to the context of South Asia. And all of these factors together, I think, would make an interesting perspective for today's session. So with this background, I would like to start. How I would like to pose the stance of this presentation is, how do we decide what to conserve, why to conserve? I mean, coming from the choice, do we, given the case of biases when it comes to accepting heritage, we have to understand that a lot of academicians have come to the understanding that history has to be understood in a global context. We have to step out of the we have to step out of the mentality of narrating history in a nation state perspective. Alternative specialities, which were the basis for cross-cultural exchanges, growing interconnections between different people, challenging existing identities, creation of new identities, creation of global network for systematic transfer of people, commodities, institutions. These sites, these contexts have a significant bearing on global history. I mean, as a common past for global heritage. So we have to start looking at sites such as hill stations in India, not as heritage of colonial period, but something bigger than that. With that, I would like to come to the theoretical understanding of character of physiospatial built environments. Works of Roy Worksett in Character of Towns was fundamental in establishing how do we understand character of historic towns, historic buildings, association with people, events, local activities, styles, periods of architecture, if occupied by famous men, women, walls, railings, physiospatial characteristics rather, influence of geographical and political backgrounds, if these were sites of revolts or, social revolutions or significant historical events, topography, climate, setting, all of these come together to impart something which is very unique to historic towns. Each one of them has a different character, and we need to start looking and understanding how the intangible binds itself with the physiospatial built environment. Again, another significant, theoretical take from his work is that we have to find a way to absorb changes. Changes are inevitable in historic towns, and the culture itself is a very dynamic process. The changes have to be absorbed, and we have to find a way to not challenge the past but coexist. Um, then further understanding for the literature reveal that character as cannot be understood as a universal or a singular phenomena. We have to understand it may or may not be consistently spread across the entire historic settlement. We have to understand that these are contained within areas which sort of have a pronounced uh, set of attributes which give it this unique identity. And our purpose for understanding character of historic areas has to focus at identification of character areas. Then principal references for these works, of course, were derived from UNESCO recommendations, ICOMOS charters, a lot of policy provisions for character appraisals based in NPFF, PPS, these documents of England. Then the national framework such as INTAC, JNN, URM, and local area plans. Two important findings I would want to mention is that the consistency of character has to be quantified, should be quantified as a basis for awarding its limits, so that a specific or a focused conservation work or a strategy can be developed. And character itself can have different facets. It can be distinctive in terms of its history. It can be distinctive in terms of its picturesqueness. It can be distinctive in its character of regional practices. And all of these have intangible cultural dimensions. So we have to understand that character appraisal method can really facilitate in identifying what is the dominant character of a historic settlement or a unique distinctive settlement. Plus, how do we define this dominant character? What are the set of attributes which preserve this character? And to understand that these attributes, when are very cohesive in nature, sort of bind a character zone. So to understand what the attributes are, going back to a lot of literature which I mentioned earlier, we can identify that these are the principal attributes which can determine the character of a place. Now, this study is principally in perspective of hill stations in India, but this is an example, a case study. I mean, similar studies can be taken up for areas which are different from hill stations. Historical development, layout, setting, road form, streetscape, open spaces, landmarks, crossroads, views particularly in case of hill stations, architectural and key buildings with historical character. Now, these attributes are many in number, but I try to classify them under these headings so that it helps us map what qualities relate to historical development. So if we look at a focus area in a historic settlement, I would like to map these attributes to arrive at what is historically significant. Again, looking at these attributes, I would be able to understand how layout and setting are important, significant for a context area. Similarly, these attributes were listed for all the 8 major attributes which were listed earlier. And these became a basis for undertaking a spatial mapping for hill station context, case study of Mussoorie. And these are a lot in number. I would be putting them in the publication later for reference. I would not want to spend a lot of time reading each one out for limitation of time here. And this slide should have come a little later, but it is important because, again, case study of Mussoorie, I wanted to go back and understand how the local people understand these attributes in their, I mean, how are these attributes perceived at local level? So looking at it, for in the case of Mussoorie, views, very important attribute for preserving character. Natural heritage is very important. Green spaces, open spaces, location and setting. See, architectural build forms come at fifth number once we look at how we want to preserve the character of hill stations. And historic buildings, distinctive culture fare pretty low, because this again can relate to a lack of awareness of people towards heritage. Um, with this background, with this information, a little context about hill stations of South in Asia. Southeast hill stations set up as a very unique, retreat, summer retreat settlements by imperial governments through tax funds. That means these were economically dependent on tax. They had very limited economic activities which supported the sustenance of these towns. And secondly, these were sites of cultural integration specific to a certain community. The method to achieve this was to recreate a familiar and preferred spatial environment. This is what I was talking earlier, that the intangible cultural preferences allowed for manifestation of a unique settlement. Cultural preferences for cultural practices such as promenade, civil institutions like library, clubs, gymkhanas, sanitariums, picnics, sport, these are very unique to the cultural context, which was fundamental in establishment of these towns. However, we'll come to the changing context in another two slides. I wanted to also show that hill stations of South Asia have a very distinctive but uniform character. These are images from across Burma, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Darjeeling, that is northeast, Nainital, a valley hill station, Dalhousie. Look at the build form, which is very close to what English cottages would look like. So there was an intention of creating a home away from home, and a very successful as such, because first of all, the geoclimatic setting allowed for it. Secondly, it was, there was an effort in systematically transferring the institutional and cultural setup from a distinctive landscape to a new setting altogether. Then why hill stations? These are a unique problem, because here what we see is the hill stations which were set up in the colonial period had a complete reversal in the cultural context. There was a complete disruption in what it was set out for and what happened to it. And there is a case of discontinuity. It's as we can say, it's a very unique case where the living heritage component was disrupted, and somehow these stations continue to thrive, and they transform themselves into tourist destinations, not the seasonal one, the summer retreats, but also weekend ones, day and night tourisms. And this tourism allowed for economic sustenance of these towns, and they continue to thrive because they are unique and continue to draw tourism as the principal economic purpose, function. And if we look at, can character appraisal help? So in my understanding, character appraisal is essential because it will allow us to really understand what should be protected to conserve the character, which will again, allow for promoting the tourism and, continue the town tradition as it is. And a character appraisal also allows us to document the character periodically, which is important for proposing conservation works and proposing new development works. And coming to the case of Mussoorie, these are few images about the picturesqueness of the town, and this is where I would want to demonstrate how the mapping translated. I was able to map the entire settlements into 4 distinct zones, where this central zone, the Mall Road area, was picked up as the focus zone for executing the character assessment, character appraisal, and identification of character zones with distinctive purposes. So, one second. So looking, yes, this is the character focus area zone I had indicated earlier, and mapping. Looking at the red color, it shows that there is a consistent density of historical, build forms and spaces, which allow for us to focus on this area from a historical perspective. If we protect the build forms and the settings, the Mall Road, it might encourage us. It might encourage a better outcome from point of view of historical character preservation. Similarly, layout and settings. So factors which were listed earlier, if we map them, significant red ones, these settings are very distinctive, and these are a part of cultural memory. They call for preservation strategies, but from the perspective of maintaining the settings. Not so any development around it at a different level will also have a bearing on how these perceptions are changed. So that's the finding. Looking at landmarks density, road form density, significant attributes are clustered here, if we can see, and this consistent clustering allows us to identify the character zones, and each character zone can then have a different perspective. Yeah, two more slides.
Lisa, can you please conclude? Okay, can you
two
please
more
conclude?
slides. Yeah, about to finish. This is very important in case of a hill station because of level differences. We have different views and vistas which are of interest to tourists. To protect these views, one has to be able to understand how to map these views, how to prevent build forms coming up in certain sections so that these views are preserved. And it requires a different approach altogether to proposing strategies for protection of character. So the purpose of character appraisal is obviously to facilitate protection and integrate local participation in terms of perception, awareness, concern for local development, fund generation, and policy implementation. And in conclusion, I would want to say that hill stations are a very unique and a dynamic settlement, historic settlements, very distinctive urban systems, and efforts must be taken not to erode its distinctive picturesque character. And appraisal of existing character of hill stations can be a significant tool in protecting this urban character. And acknowledgements. Thank you to one and all for giving your time. I would conclude my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona Lisa. That was such a wonderful presentation, especially character appraisal is something that we have not touched upon in any of our previous themes. So thank you bringing this today through this presentation. Next we have on our schedule is Sonali Jaiswal. She'll be presenting on the values and realities of intangible cultural heritage in Banaras. Over to you, Sonali.
Yeah, thank you, Saranya. Can you share my screen or see my screen?
Yes, I can hear you. I can see the screen.
Okay, I'll not take much time, and thank you so much. I'm here to present on values and reality of intangible cultural heritage in Banaras. So I will be mostly talking about the real-time experiences that I had while working on Banaras. Varanasi, Banaras or Kashi is a city full of cultural values and surprises. Every day is a new chapter or a finding of life there. So I just saw this man looking at this stone this, and he was smiling. I thought, what is he doing? So I tried to find it out, and what I find was really surprised me. It was a deity, it was a shivling 2 floors below, and he was actually worshipping there. So these kind of spiritual connections and the regular rituals that are performed it's very interesting, and it is difficult to go to these places, find these places. This is Pita Maheshwar temple in Varanasi. So this was a small example. And looking at intangible cultural heritage, it is about performing arts, social practices, traditional craftsmanship, and many more. But it is incomplete without tangible assets. So I'll be talking about 3 case examples here. One is Ghat, Banaras Gharana, and brass handicrafts. So iconic riverfront of the historic city of Varanasi. This has been recently submitted for a tentative list of World Heritage under category 3, 4, and 6. So these are 2 images from one of the very famous festival of Deepavali in Varanasi. So we can, if we look at broader perspective, we can see the intensity of people, the intensity of beliefs that they have, and they all come together, celebrate. So all the ghats are decorated so beautifully. This is what makes this places alive. And daily life activities, if we look at, the rituals are transferring from one generation to another, and this makes the place alive and keeps the spirit of the place. And this is another very good example from Nag Nathaiya festival at Tulsi Ghat. This is held every year, and this cultural practice is still alive. It also acts as a driving force for bringing people together, celebrate, and keeping the city spirit alive. And in the second image, you can see how the setting of this festival is done. Now, the second one is a living cultural setting, a mohalla with artists. This, we talk about Banaras Gharana. All the Indian classical artists from Banaras Gharana, most of them live in this area, which is Piplani Katra, a small area in Banaras. So under Hriday scheme in 2015, a heritage walk was proposed to promote these artists. So, but it is still now not being executed. So I, along with a group of people and very active NGOs, local NGOs there, like Swakarm Sansthan, I tried to start this heritage walk, and the people were so much welcoming. And this is a Riyaz room from Pandit Samta Prasad Mishra ji house. And this is how we experience the live music there. And we ended up at Kabir Mutt, which is another important landmark. She is the youngest tabla artist there at Kishan Maharaj ji house. And through these initiatives, through public engagement and public participation, we were able to execute these heritage walks. And you know, all the community there, all the people living there were so much supportive that this was possible. Now the third, I'll be talking about diminishing art and artisans, brass handicraft workers, and dhateras. So Varanasi is also known for brass handicraft works. And the main challenge at these places are the continuity of practice from generation to generation is under threat due to the lack of demand and exposure. These lost artisans are changing their art field and moving in other regular service sector. And the initiatives by the government to promote these artisans has a very far location from the historic city, which makes them very difficult to travel. So there are people who have already left the practice of brass work. So we again tried to find such lost artisans and convince them to work with us. And we were surprised to see what they had built. So these kind of art pieces were built by them using, we also educated them the technology, the knowledge of techniques, new techniques. And we also worked on artifact restorations like these. So Soga Design team started this initiative to support the lost artisans and create a platform where we all can share knowledge, and modern techniques in a traditional way. So I think all the architects and practitioners and designers listening to this, I would really request you to encourage the artists around you. So whatever designs we make, we can definitely approach them so that these artisans these artisans are involved in practice still. And So we talk about people, place, and time. This is the time when we also need to look at the new methods, technologies, and market intelligence. And I will end my presentation with the message that sense of a place is because of the people, not just structures and buildings. It depends on us how we shape it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sonali. You were on time. Thank you very much. And this was such an excellent presentation. It just took me back to Banaras when I had visited, and these each and every story that you spoke about. It's the community, the art, the architecture, the ICH. It was quite wonderful. Thank you so much, Sonali. Next on our schedule is Miss Jyoti Shukla. She will be presenting on the Chitara community and Matani Pachadi art. Over to you.
Thank you, Sharanya. I will just share my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, you're audible and I can see you.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to present a work that we have been working with the Chitara community in Ahmedabad. And so today I'll be talking about what were some of the interventions that we were able to come up with. So starting with what exactly is Matani Pachadi for the benefit of everyone. Matani Pachadi is a textile art form that is practiced by only one family based in Ahmedabad called the Chitara family. They have been living in Ahmedabad for quite some time, for the last 5 decades, and practicing this age-old craft and carrying forward a very long legacy of traditional crafts in Gujarat. And what we see on the left hand side is a representation of one of the paintings that the community are involved in. There are numerous other pictures that we can see that the community is involved in, and it's done entirely by hand and using natural processes. So moving forward, I wanted to discuss some challenges that are faced by the community, and these are very few that I've picked up for because due to the limited time. So again, given the situation of COVID, there have been numerous economic challenges faced by the community. Along with this, social challenges is something that they have been facing for quite a lot of for very long time, due to the background they come from and the slight insensitivity that a lot of time people have towards communities. And of course, there are a lot of resource related issues that are faced by the challenges. So not going into the details, but on a very broad level, that these were the challenges, and focusing more on what were the interventions that we were able to come up. So starting with, as Sonali also mentioned, that heritage walks, she mentioned about heritage walks. So similarly, we were able to curate heritage walks in collaboration with the community. And in these walks, what we did, we invited young people and from different parts of the city of Ahmedabad, and of course we were open to people from entire country to come and visit the artisans and the communities, and to witness what all the kind of processes artisans are involved in and the kind of work that they do. And in these walks, we also invited the artisans themselves to present their work, and an opportunity for the people to directly engage with the artisans and to have discussions on the processes, the steps, and the history and everything, to be able to whatever biases people have, they're able to to be able to remove those biases and stereotypes that people have, and to be able to engage with the craft better, so that if we do not have the information about something, then we cannot go forward and save something. So these have been great interventions to be able to bridge that gap between the people and the communities. Moving forward, this is a very personal project that I was also involved in, where we were actually trying to use ICH for education, and we were able to use ICH as a resource for education, and we conducted a lot of sessions in schools as well as in colleges. So what you see on the screen is on the top right hand side, what we see is So what we did in this, as part of this project, we looked at Ahmedabad as a historic city and how the city can be used for educational purposes, and how different ICH within the city can be actually used for education for children and adolescents in schools, because we felt that would be a great way to not only provide practical and
Hello.
There's some problem at her side.
I think there is some issue with Jyoti, so we will just try to get in touch with her. Just give us a minute. I think we have lost Jyoti. So we will move ahead with our schedule to the next presentation for the e-symposium. That will be by myself on the reflections and ground realities of the e-symposium, which we have discussed over the past 4 sessions. I hope you can see my screen and I'm clearly audible to you.
Yes, Saranya. You're
Okay,
audible.
thank you very much. I'm really glad to be presenting on the reflection and ground realities of ICH. I have to say the presentation preceding this, they were really excellent by Mona Lisa, Sonali, and Jyoti, giving us really fresh perspective to the topics of ICH in relation to the historic towns. As you may have noticed from the schedule, I will share the reflections from the e-symposium, followed by a conversation with Dr. Yuka Yokoleto, and eventually the panel discussion with experts and emerging professionals to discuss the ground realities of ICH. As mentioned by Niyati earlier, we began the e-symposium with these 2 critical questions to enhance our understanding about ICH. However, through the series of papers that have been presented, our thought process and understanding has evolved. We truly appreciate each of the case study for providing us with the knowledge and insight to understand the important roles of community and ICH. This was discussed under highly pertinent themes such as the interactions and intersections and interdependency, tangible to intangible, tools and strategies for sustainability through ICH as driver for sustainable tourism, and understanding heritage economics to make communities and historic cities resilient. The following presentation summarizes the major takeaways and reflections from the case studies, including significant engagement and challenges in South Asia for advancing theory to practice in ICH. Reflections on the e-symposium acknowledges that South Asia is a region with abundant ICH. It is considered as a repository of diverse living cultural traditions and expressions and intangible cultural heritage. However, ICH is facing many challenges due to urbanization, lack of importance, and underrepresentation. Furthermore, considering that ICH is constantly recreated in contravention to the value of tangible cultural heritage, the interdependence and its interrelationship between tangible and intangible is
Aranya, you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So as I was saying, the interdependence and interrelationship between tangible and intangible cultural heritage is constantly evolving. Hence, safeguarding ICH becomes crucial. This was very well reflected in session 1, where the case studies from Pakistan, Bhutan, India, and Nepal gave us a very meaningful outlook into the interactions, contestation, and challenges in historic towns, and made us look at tangible through the intangible. The key takeaways from session 1 are as follows. 1, confirms the crucial contribution of ICH to sustainable development through integrated approaches. The case studies from Lahore and Kathmandu gave us deeper insight to this aspect. 2, share a common concern at the discourse of global IT of ICH versus the South Asian perspective. This is supported through case studies from Bhutan and Jaipur, India, given that generally tangible and intangible heritage are considered as divided entities within UNESCO. It is increasingly apparent that this is not the ground reality. Session 2 gave us meaningful outlook into the role of ICH, sustainability of historic towns, through the case studies of Shimla, Jaipur, Kandy, and Ahmedabad, as well as understanding the role of ICH in urban landscapes. The next are the 2 key takeaways from session 2. 3, multicultural cooperation in the field of ICH has been beneficial advantages at sub-regional, regional, and international levels. This was understood through the existing instruments and tools that were contextualized and adapted in the cities presented. Innovative approaches for integration of ICH in practice and education. This was gleaned from cities such as Jaipur, where craftspeople are struggling to maintain their original artistries with an attempt to improve and innovate in response to the evolving 21st century cities. The next session, session 3, delved into the aspect of ICH as a driver for tourism in historic towns. The case studies presented were from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, and India. The key takeaways from this were the undeniable role of intangible cultural heritage to achieve the SDGs. With present-day challenges of rapid urbanization and the role of ICH in historic towns, the case studies presented informed us about the community and their relation to ICH, using its ICH to strive at a model of sustainable development. The next point is about maintain continuity by revival of dying arts and crafts in the absence of hereditary practices. This is crucial to the premise set to even today's session, integrating intergenerational learning and adopting that into innovative strategies for ICH's relevance to today's generation and safeguarding for the future generation. The last session that we had was on heritage economics, which gave us the, how conventionally built fabric may have been a center of attention for architects and conservation professionals. However, today the social cultural realm as well as economic facets of historic towns are also considered crucial for sustainable development. The key takeaways from here were safeguarding of ICH is vital to strengthen community viability and resilience. This aspect is derived from the understanding of the case studies from Dhaka, Shimla, Kerala, the Durga Puja in Kolkata, and understanding the finer equations of cultural economics. The last key takeaway is the practice of sustainable language. As I think in the very first the presentation, this was very much discussed about at the grassroots levels. Using the sustainable language, one can see the need of integrated heritage management in our historic towns, especially when there are parallel concepts on tangible and intangible, as well as the natural and the cultural. Holistic approach is the need of the hour, grounded in reality. In reflection, the e-symposium began with 2 questions, and the process of seeking answers to these questions, we have come across many fine wisdoms on ICH. The series of case studies presented have gone beyond the understood discourse of ICH, while presenting us with newer understanding and insight into the ICH of South Asia. Now, this brings me to the next part of our session, a very exciting part. I feel very humbled and privileged to be introducing Dr. Yuka Yokelito. I don't think he needs any introduction, and every cultural heritage professional will vouch for how important his book, A History of Architectural Conservation is, was, and always will be. Dr. Yuka Yokelito has worked with ICROM from 1972 in the position of Director in Architectural Conservation to 1998 as the Assistant Director General of ICROM. He was the President of ICOMOS International Training Committee from 1993 to 2002 and ICOMOS World Heritage Advisor from 2000 to 2006. He has been an honorary member of ICOMOS International from 2014 and an honorary visiting professor at the University of York from 2013 to 16. He has also been the special advisor to Director General of ICROM, professor at the University of Nova Grozia, Slovenia. He has numerous publications concerning the philosophy of conservation and the management of World Heritage properties. Over to you, Sukrit.
Thank you for joining all the previous sessions and the subsequent discussions that we have been having over the time, over the coffee and wine. So for a very holistic understanding on this topic, no one would be more apt, and hence we thank you for accepting our invite to answer a couple of questions that will throw light on this ongoing discussions. Without wasting time, I'll jump straight to the questions. In the backdrop of the entire discussions of tangible and intangible and their interrelationship, let me ask you the first question. What, in your view, should be the holistic approach for conservation and management of historic cities?
Well, thank you, Yati. I've been thinking a little bit about your questions, and of course, they are very big questions, and the time is very limited. But basically, I would like to say that normally, when you are talking about heritage, you talk about heritage in a limited sense. You're listing a few structures or buildings or sites by law, and then you call that heritage. But when we are talking about management of a territory, then we are not anymore talking about individual heritage buildings to start with. So the holistic approach is that you have to have a general policy for the entire territory of your community. Territory means the area that your community has the jurisdiction, where it has a jurisdiction and can manage it. But also the historical territory, which means that it is the area which has been built in response to the needs of the society and the economic developments over time. When I speak about economics, I am talking about the way the community functions. And the economy, of course, is the result of our cultural approach to things. So we invent things and we try to find solutions to that. And the built environment represents the result of that approach. Now, when we are talking about a holistic approach, we need to understand what is your territory. It has its natural ecosystems, and we know that this means particular care, because we need to make sure that the animals and the plants have the necessary space for living. But we also have cultural ecosystems, which is the result of the the functional development of a community in a particular territory in relation to the nature, in relation to the natural environment. So the natural environment, natural ecosystems, and the cultural ecosystems are interrelated. Now, recently, due to various torrential rains, particularly in Europe, but not only in Europe, also in China, I don't know about India, but anyway, there have been lots of problems because there have been floods coming into the cities. Now, what is the reason of these floods? The reason of these floods is that we have not been taking care of our environment. We may have cut the trees in the wrong places, or we have been cementing the streets. So there is no way where the water can disappear. So we need to have a risk management system for the entire territory, risk preparedness, and understand how we can avoid this sort of thinking. And so we have to think that the built environment must work together in harmony with the natural environment. So you have to have a risk map. You have to identify what are the vulnerabilities, and then you have to decide it. Now, basically, of course, the whole territory needs to be understood as an integrity, in its integrity, which means that all the elements that together contribute to the significance of this place are taken into account. And we are not talking about heritage. We are talking about the existing elements and also the existing functions. So there is also the question about the human functions, because the buildings are the result of a response to functions. The functions are the intangible aspect. The buildings are the tangible response to the intangible functions. I mean, just to have a very brief cover page. Okay.
Yeah.
You had another question.
Yeah. So the second question is basically on values. So assessment of values is critical for developing a sound heritage management strategy or approach. So my question is, how do we make an integrated assessment of heritage values of historic cities that take into consideration tangible and intangible dimensions?
Yes, it's another interesting question. Because as we have said, there is a heritage community. The heritage community, you call it intangible, but to me it's made of human beings. Human beings have their thinking, their aspirations, their beliefs, and they associate meaning to the places. It's a human capacity is to associate meaning to whatever surrounds and to the environment, to the natural environment and to the built environment. The natural environment, we associate the meaning because we live with it. So we need to understand what is it for. And this goes even to the whole universe. India has very interesting thinking about the universe. And the buildings that we have in a territory, the roads, the spaces, the open spaces and the covered spaces, and the statues and all these elements that we are putting into this, so they are a response to our aspirations. So they get a significance as part of the whole environment, which is gradually developing. So if we want to have an integrated assessment of heritage values, we also have to understand what do we mean with value. The question about value is that I think that there are so many meanings associated with the concept of value that we get confused. I think it is important to distinguish that value is association of a significance to a place. association of in relative significance in it's an association of, it's the comparison of one thing to some other things which have similar value, similar meaning. So for example, if you have a residential complex, you like this residential complex better than the other one. So that's a value judgment. And within that heritage, that sort of residential complex, you have some buildings that you like better than the others. Therefore, you maybe list them as heritage. But if we are talking about management, we cannot limit the management only to these listed buildings. Even historic urban areas cannot be managed without taking into account the broader economic context, because economics are managed in a territorial sense. It depends. We have to have farming, agriculture. We have forestry. We have fishing. We have different types of activities. That is part of our territory, and those are the activities that need to be managed when we are managing. So when we are talking about these sort of issues, I think that we need to identify, as we said, about this cultural ecosystem in a certain area, and we need to understand what is the identity that we have built through a historical structural approach to the economics and management of this area. And therefore, within that context, we have the intangible and tangible aspects that you call. But everything that we have as a heritage has intangible and tangible aspects. There is no physical object without an intangible dimension if we have associated meaning to it. It is the meaning and the significance that we actually associate with an object that gives it significance.
Thank you so much. I think that was, put the things into perspective in a way, and in a very, with a lot of clarity, which I think would be very important especially for the emerging professionals that we are, looking at today. So to continue for them, the last question would be, because considering your decades of experience and knowledge, and you are still actually continuing with your papers and your knowledge building work that we still see so far today also. My question would be that what would be your advice for emerging professionals who are working on heritage cities today? So how do you think they should be, working towards it, and as a management or as a site managers and a lot of other.
I think that the first issue is that they must know your heritage. You must know your heritage. So there must be and the heritage is not just the listed heritage, but also the non-listed heritage. In India, you have this 2004 Intact Charter. I think it's an important charter because it actually gives you an idea that we are not only talking about what is listed, we are also talking about what is not listed. I was involved in a sort of discussion about Ahmedabad some years ago, when there was a proposal that it should be put on the World Heritage List. And the original idea that it was the stone buildings within the historic town that were the most valuable things, those should be put on the World Heritage List. And then at the university, they were thinking there actually are very good wooden buildings as well. And maybe those could also, we should select some of them to put as well. But then when we were discussing it, we realized that I think there are hundreds of small neighborhoods which actually make the whole urban fabric within the historic walled city.
Right.
And so it was proposed that the whole city should be protected as urban heritage. Okay. And that would be the starting point. But then we know that the entire territory had a very interesting water management system. we have water reservoirs, we have step wells and issues like that. And I think that unfortunately, these are not considered together. Because in fact, it should normally be that the whole thing is taken into account. So my advice is that we must have a multidisciplinary team who have to study not just the things which are put on the World Heritage List, but the entire territory where these are located, because the significance also depends on the context. And maybe I should also add that, and in fact, the World Heritage Committee has also been very concerned about the fact that most of the problems that we have in World Heritage sites are from the context. Therefore, we are now, UNESCO has adopted the 2011 recommendation on the management of historic urban landscapes. And I think that we must actually talk about historic urban landscapes when we talk about World Heritage, not just the listed area. And it must be a multidisciplinary team, and the people must know the site. And it is important that you have, I mean, what I have said before is valid also to the World Heritage issues. May I also say that outstanding universal value is not so much about the value. It's an implication of the requirements for listing. It means that you have to meet certain criteria. You have to take care of the integrity. You have to take care of the authenticity. You have to have the management and protection in place. And all these are part of the outstanding universal value. So it is a mistake to start talking about values-based management. We cannot base our management on value judgments only. We must do it on knowledge and understanding of what is the significance of a particular territory in terms of historical and its natural ecosystems. That's in short.
Yeah, that is true. Actually, it's I don't know, the time is less, but I sincerely hope that it would be much better if we can have a complete session with you, in the near future, and that would be just on listening to you talk about all these various aspects, and they are so simply put, so that they are very clear to any listeners, especially from this heritage background. So thank you so much, Dr. Yokoleto, for sparing this precious time with us.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Yokoleto. We are very, very, very thankful for having him on board to have this conversation with the time and, the time zone that we are working with. So this was incredible. And we are eternally grateful to Niyati for getting this done, to getting this conversation arranged for our e-symposium. And as Dr. Yokoleto mentioned, how important it is to understand the definitions, and also for emerging professionals, his input towards that was very, very useful, and I think we are very, very grateful for this session. And he has given us so much lot to also think about. With that, now we head to our next exciting part of the session, which is the panel discussion. Today's panel discussion has 10 panelists, including experts and emerging professionals from South Asia, as well as professionals with a global insight into ICH and SDG. So let me just invite our panelists one by one. I hope you can see my screen. First first, I would like to invite on the panel Mr. Dennis Rodwell. He is an architect, planner, independent researcher, and consultant for cultural heritage and sustainable urban development from Scotland, UK. We have Dr. Sharif Shams Imon, Assistant Professor, Institute for Tourism Studies, Macau, consultant to UNESCO and Governments on World Heritage, President ICMOS Bangladesh, expert member of ICMOS ICCV. Next is Dr. Neil Kamal Shampange, Director, Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, ICMOS Nepal member. Next is Ms. Ananya Bhattacharya, co-founder and director at banglanatak.com, ICMOS India Executive Committee member. Expert member of ICH. Next is Mr. Gabriel Caballero, focal point ICMOS SDGs working group and member of IIC Cultural Landscape. Next is Hannah John, conservation architect, graduate from KU Leuven. Next is Mr. Sukrit Sen, heritage manager and musician associated with Living Waters Museum and ICROM, and also the East Zone EPWG representative for ICMOS India. Next is Priyanka Singh, conservation architect and independent consultant, treasurer at ICMOS India and EPWG focal point for IIC Cultural Landscape. Next is Ms. Anshika Jain, a heritage professional and project associate at Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts and EPWG ICMOS India member. And the last panelist on board is Ms. Ritika Khanna, heritage consultant and researcher, UNESCO consultant to Ministry of Culture, Government of India and EPWG ICMOS India member. I will stop sharing my screen, and it's so nice to see so many of you together. To start with, the panel discussion would have one question for each of our panelists. This question is very much as per your background in the ICH spectrum. So first, I would like to have the question for Mr. Dennis Rodwell. Just a second, I'm just having some lag here. Okay, my first question is to Mr. Dennis Rodwell. Over the past few decades, many attempts have been made to understand the interlinkage and interdependence between the tangible and intangible. In Nara, it's touched upon, and in Yamato, it's emphasized upon. So in your view, how do these discourses play out in terms of South Asia?
Can you see and hear me?
I can see you and I can hear you.
Okay, this question is set against the title of International Charters and their relevance. So I'd like to start by thanking you very much for inviting me and for tolerating my comments on the chat function in the previous 4 sessions. You take a risk here. When I am invited to write and speak, I do not necessarily say what others expect, and I must request your indulgence again today. I was born just a few weeks after India and Pakistan gained independence. My remarks today relate principally to what I understand as the Indian subcontinent. If I shorthand this as India, I hope this causes no offense. Heritage, as what Laura Jane Smith has encapsulated as the authorized heritage discourse, did not enter my consciousness until the first half of the 1970s, around 1972 to 73, after I left university. The word heritage in its present-day meaning had not come into use. Inheritance from the past was not divided into cultural, natural, tangible, and intangible. My mother, for example, was a graduate in natural sciences, the life sciences. I was not aware of today's divisions. My professional focus is on historic cities. To quote from myself, sorry for the indulgence, an historic city is at one and the same time a physical place and a human space. Its authenticity is a compound of man-made and associated natural elements coupled with a complex mix of human activities, to which I should add time as being a major factor. I've challenged elsewhere the transfer of global north, essentially Eurocentric norms into South Asia. I challenge them further today. The concept of international charters is a misnomer. The standard format and typology of all international charters derives from European-originated models, as do the terminologies and assumptions behind them. The very idea of universal standards is questionable, for example, when set against the 2005 UNESCO Convention on Cultural Diversity. Nara is a city in Japan, but the Nara document was drafted by a Belgian and a Canadian. All the cited documents in the Yamato text originate from Europe. India is not urbanized according to the global north model, and to me, there is no social, cultural, or environmental rationale for it to become so. With just 1/3 of the population urbanized and 2/3 ruralized, the relationships between culture and nature, tangible and intangible, are totally different, as are the time spans. Thinking in the global north operates within a time frame of 1 or 2, sometimes 3 generations, no more. Continuity is a major challenge. Memories are short. The past, as has been written, is a foreign country. Nations in the global south, many of which have long histories of colonialism, operate to a multi-generational time frames embracing centuries, if not millennia. Creative and dynamic continuity of traditions and identity is not an issue. It's not a problem. It's the norm. Memories are long. The past is embedded in the present and the future. This is a major distinction. As Professor A.J. Krishna Menon has said, the specificity of the Indian situation is in the fact that authenticity can be created. This is a complete anomaly to the Eurocentric notion of authenticity. A key word is continuity. There is a key distinction, for example, between the 2011 UNESCO recommendation on the historic urban landscape, which only uses the word layering, and the 2011 ICOMOS Valletta principles, which only use the word continuity. UNESCO has been described as having a fetishism for list making. As Navin mentioned, the UK has not signed the Intangible Convention. I do not expect it to do so. France, for example, has listed the baguette. Is the UK supposed to list fish and chips? I hope this is not too provocative, but to me, tangible cultural heritage and intangible cultural heritage are external constructs, which are not central to my understanding of cities across the Indian subcontinent, South Asia. And I am very supportive of the notion that shoehorning the region into European norms is barely fit for purposes. Interlinkages and interdependencies, as noted in the question posed to me, presuppose that there are divisions and separations. So back to that question, what is the relevance of so-called international charters of South Asia? I think we have to be very careful about this. The 2004 INTAC Charter, which Yokola Toledo has just mentioned, and which is not recognized as an international charter, is a good start. And I would like to see this foundation built upon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rodwell. That was fantastic. I mean, I think this is like more of a teaser because your knowledge is so extensive on ICH. We would someday would want to have an entire session to discuss about it, especially as you gave us an insight from where your understanding of ICH begins, and also the international relevance on ICH right now. This question actually came up because over the past 4 sessions we have been discussing ICH, but this question has been something very emerging, and I'm really glad that I put this question up to you, because we have some clarity and we know that this is something we have to delve into more, especially in the South Asian context. Thank you very much. Next, may I have Mr. Dr. Iman? The next question would be for you. Countries in South Asia are connected by a long history of trade, interactions, and movement of people, shaping out shared heritage in the form of its ICH. How important is it to have a balanced view, advocating for shared heritage and recognizing the communities across borders as ambassadors of ICH in the present time? Over to you, Dr. Iman.
Right, it seems quite a difficult question, given the political context we live in today. Well, yeah, I mean, shared heritage itself says a lot. And when you say a balanced view, I think there's nothing to be balanced here. I mean, when we say shared, that means we already have a lot of overlapping between what we have in this subcontinent. So if you want to look at it, and we need to look at it how this interchange happened within this region, and also that interchange that happened with other regions beyond the boundaries of the Indian subcontinent over time. So in a way, the connection is very much deep-rooted. And without understanding the root, we can only create divisions when we talk about balancing it, because immediately we're talking about different things and we're talking about the differences. So, I mean, when we talk about heritage, we are not just looking at our just immediate past. We are going, a long time before the recent historical period. So at that time, we didn't have these boundaries, right? So if you look at the history of this region, that means when you're talking about ICH in particular, we have so many things that are interconnected. And even we talk about Bangladesh, and we talk about West Bengal, and even we talk about Assam or Meghalaya. So there's a continuum. There's no hard line between us when we're talking about our shared culture. So the most important thing would be to really work together because of these political boundaries we have today. We somehow tend to work separately. I mean, when we talk about, say, terracotta temples in Bangladesh, and in our recent tentative list updating project, the temples, and especially there are many terracotta temples included. But we know that in the West Bengal, there are many. But then by having this kind of artificial division when it comes to culture or cultural heritage, we are actually not looking at holistically. And as Yuka mentioned just a while ago, that this separation between tangible and intangible is quite artificial, and we know one of the reasons for having this discussion separately, like tangible and intangible, is kind of influenced by UNESCO's conventions, because the 1972 convention and 2003 convention, they came at different times, almost like 30 years apart. But this didn't happen because there is an intellectual or conceptual division between us, but because our development, our understanding developed over time. And by the time we realize that we are actually excluding the most important, probably the most important expression of our culture is not included and not covered. and this is operational reason, we have a separate convention. But in all these discussions over and over again, we are talking the same thing, that yes, there's no actually such division between the two. I mean, Dennis also mentioned the same thing. So when you talk about shared heritage and shared culture and how we can work together, we just have to go back to our history and see the connections rather than see the separations. And I would think that would be the good starting point. And having this kind of symposiums is actually a very good starting point, because this is where we start to talk to each other and find common grounds where we can look at it as a more of a connected element rather than something that has been separated kind of artificially.
Thank you, Dr. Imran. Very well said. Actually, this has been a very emerging, notion about the differentiation between tangible and intangible, which we have realized is quite not necessary. And I mean, you shared the example of the terracotta temples. People who have actually explored, the eastern part of our country in India, they would know how intrinsic it is to the cultural fabric of our country. And that is, those shared heritages are so important, because it's a community after all. When it comes to ICH, it's the community which actually works. The skilled people who actually work on these temples, they have a shared knowledge about this. So it's very interesting to have your input into this. And as you said, it's all about working together for the cultural heritage. Either it's tangible or intangible, but it's about working together. And I think this symposium is grounding that fact of South Asia. Maybe we can start with South Asia and then we can go forward. Thank you very much, Dr. Imran. Next I have on this panel is Dr. Neil. May we have Dr. Neil? The question for Dr. Neil is, intangible cultural heritage is associated with traditional knowledge systems passed down from generation to generation, like in the case of a Guti system in Nepal. Can this be carried out now through mentorship program, where maybe it's not within the families, but can it expand beyond that also? Over to you, Dr. Neil.
Thank you. I think this is a slightly different question, but I would like to take the same spirit that Dennis pointed and Iman also emphasized, that the moment we say traditional, I think we are already giving an impression that, okay, there is something which is of one kind, and then perhaps the behind the notion is that there is modern or contemporary or scientific. I think this has this parallel problem as the tangible and intangible, the community and the professionals, that kind of notion. So that is something we have to keep in mind. I'm not going into that. The second is the term mentorship. What do we mean by mentorship? Because it can be conceptualized multiple ways, but we have to recognize that in mentorship, you have mentor and mentee, right? And it's a relationship between these two agencies, the mentor and the mentee. And perhaps there is a concept of continuity. That's what you were referring, the intergenerational transmission of ICH. So there are these three concepts that we have to very carefully think of. And since I do not have enough time to go through, I would like to highlight a few points that might be important with what we call as the traditional knowledge systems. ICROM had organized a forum a few years back on this topic. And the paper I wrote there, I sort of used the duality between the traditional knowledge systems, but then the modern knowledge systems. And I compared them. And my argument was that rather than, again, creating this separation, we have to see knowledge as a continuation, because knowledge is not a static thing, just like heritage, right? It is also evolves. It needs to evolve. It needs to change and make sense to the given context anytime, now and in future. So in that light, I think the notion of traditional knowledge that we are referring here should be seen as at least in three aspects. One is, this is knowledge, okay? This is the repository of knowledge. So the Guti system example that you gave from Kathmandu Valley, which were probably discussed earlier as well. The Guti is a repository of knowledge. It's a system of knowledge that is there in the community. That's one aspect. The second is that aspect has given its own system, which can be related to our idea of governance, okay, or management. right? So there is this embedded systems within this knowledge repository that also you have to recognize. So it's not just that objective knowledge, but also what do you do with that knowledge in terms of application of it, right? So that's the second aspect. And the third aspect is it's not about a product, it's a process. And when you say it's a process, it's dynamic, it's evolving, it's changing, and it responds to the context it is good. And that's the beauty of what we consider as the traditional knowledge systems. Now, if we're trying to connect this to the mentorship program, perhaps this mentorship idea comes from the modern educational system. Perhaps Dennis would say the Western scientific paradigm. And as opposed to that, perhaps the traditional system would have the master apprentice system, the family, transmission system. And so what I'm trying to say is the traditional knowledge systems and the mentorship program, if we are using these two ideas as two separate things, I think we need to be careful that, and it's already there. The idea of mentorship that we're trying to refer as a modern professional development is already there in any traditional knowledge systems. Okay, and this is where the product, the process, and the system comes together in the definition of the traditional knowledge systems. Now, because of that, the short answer to your question is yes, it can help in the mentorship program, but we have to see how do you operationalize. We don't want to create another divide here, but we want to emphasize the relation that is already there in the traditional knowledge systems between the mentor and the mentee. And perhaps you want to capture that and you want to emphasize that. And I'm not trying to romanticize the traditional knowledge systems here. Traditional knowledge systems might also have been fallen into some traps over the course of time. Now, today we might have to recognize those traps and try to address that, try to address those shortcomings. And so if the traditional knowledge systems have some shortcomings in today's time, this mentorship concept can actually address that also. So it's a multi-pronged relationship that I'm looking at. Another point I would like to highlight is the mentorship, since it is a professional concept, should not be just seen that, oh, it's a program to train new group of professionals. It's for the young professionals and all that. We should also keep in mind that none of us are professionals if we think of the traditional knowledge system, the depth and richness of traditional knowledge systems. We are always a mentee in front of that system, right? So we should always be open to learn from that system. So therefore, this mentorship program should be there, but as a system which goes both ways, from the professionals to the community or the system, but also system gives to the community, whether it's young or the expert professionals. I'm sure Yuka would also agree with me, Dennis would agree with me that if you go and work with the Guti system now, I'm sure you will learn so much from the Guti system itself that you will feel like you are being mentored by working with that system, right? So that's the notion we have to see. But bottom line is I agree that there is a scope in this, and we have to find this dynamic relationship and bring that traditional knowledge systems into our modern systems or the frameworks, and perhaps use the idea of mentorship to not only empower the young professionals, but also the young community members within the traditional communities also, because they, for whatever reason, might also be increasingly disconnected from the traditional knowledge systems. Okay, we have to also recognize that. So the idea of mentorship might be very useful in addressing those issues in the community itself, but also bringing those lessons to the experts, so-called experts as well. So it works multiple ways, and I agree that there is an opportunity there. But just a word of caution is there are these kind of dynamics that we have to be careful not to get into those traps. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you, Dr. Neil. Actually, I totally agree to the way you put it across, because I felt like that we are making a program right here, right now, because mentorship is something, it varies region to region. We are right now just discussing in South Asian context, but beyond this also it varies. And the Guti system has fascinated me since you have spoken about it. So this question emerged from that there's so much to learn for us also as practitioners. We always make these divisions of ICH practitioners where I don't know, are we talking about them as a community or it's going to be the expert members, but these divisions have been created. Let's accept that. So when these, this idea was, I put across this as a question. This was from the current context where people, and as you actually mentioned, the young practitioners within the community themselves, they might not be interested, but this can, arouse their interest in something like the ICH within the Guti system. So that is, this is fantastic, and I'm sure all the EPs right now watching this will be very glad to hear that there's so much from our traditional knowledge systems itself that can be taken ahead, and we can learn so much more. And this is just one example. I'm pretty sure many other countries from South Asia also have similar experiences, and maybe after this conversation we could have some more examples and maybe empower these systems, traditional knowledge systems, that can help everyone. Thank you very much, Dr. Neil. As we are discussing about capacity building, because the mentorship program and such are for that, we have our next panelist who is kind of an expert in that. So may I call upon Ms. Ananya Bhattacharya. The next question for her is, with your experience in ICH and running an NGO, can you expand on the role of NGOs for capacity building in ICH on the grassroots levels?
Thank you, Sharanya, for that question. And it has been really a delight watching the webinars and participating in today's discussion. Now, I'll answer in the context of the overall webinar, that in historical towns, what is our role of NGOs or civil society organizations. Now, when we're talking of ICH, there are certain primary aspects which we need to remember for its sustainability and viability. One is, of course, what we discussed, the skill transmission, the skill repertoire that needs to continue. Then the second is the reputation. It must be known to people. People need to be aware of it. And that's where, we had all our discussions related to market, creative economy, tourism. Then the third aspect, which Naveen briefly touched upon today morning, is the rights part, the ethics part of it. Are the ICH bearers, the traditional practitioners, are they empowered to have control on their ICH? Do they have the say? And the fourth part, which I'll say, which we have discussed a lot today, many of us have spoken of, is the innovation part, that ICH is not static, it's dynamic, it's ever-changing. And as NGO, and then for capacity building, all these dimensions it's very important to be aware of. And the role of NGO is that of a facilitator, right? So they are working with the community, and they are working as supporting networking of the community to various other stakeholders. So establishing skill transmission systems where there are the masters. Neil spoke of the Guru Shishya Parampara, where the masters can continue the learning. That's one. The second aspect, which is very important now, is the role of formal and informal education. How ICH can be integrated into all this. What role do secondary institutions, schools can play? What role can tertiary institutions play? Today only I saw a news clipping where a traditional Chow dancer, she's proudly sharing that she has passed a diploma course in a university in Purulia on Chow dance. So every ICH, what scope of formal education and learning is there? And that's where, we need to really work together. The next is the reputation. When we're talking of the awareness creation, we need to empower these people so that they can speak. That's one. And they can use technology. This is a huge area of work for NGOs and civil society where we can support the ICH bearers. And the other aspect is the ethics of it. I'm talking of Varanasi, I'm talking of Varanasi sari, I'm showing the makeup, but I'm not naming them. I'm not mentioning the art form either. In several cases, we show the picture of the painting, do not mention it. But all these must be in our management of historic city strategy. That whenever I'm showing a picture of ICH, of a traditional bearer, name them, acknowledge them. These are important things we need to do. We're in the middle of the pandemic, and we are all hoping that we are coming out of it. And what happened in the pandemic? The first thing to stop were the cultural spaces. The first thing to stop was tourism, and all these tradition bearers across all these historic towns in our country and all across the world were the worst affected. In context like ours in South Asia, there was hardly any policies supportive of them. So we need to negotiate for that. In India, civil society did an exemplary work in the name of creative dignity, where they came together to support the artists to go online, to go digital. Several NGOs supported, this online shift. So this is an important role. And the fourth is, of course, all this discussion about authenticity and values, that is where, ICH and tangible and natural are all together. And we need to remember that in ICH, we don't use the term authenticity. And another thing is ICH is always living. That is the basic definition of ICH. It is always living. So we need to be clear across our heritage professions on this. And we are in a very complex world where we are talking of supra-diversity today, right? And climate change is forcing migration. So ICH is traveling. So there is no, ICH defined by political or boundaries. It is, moving across the globe and very fast compared to previous centuries. It has always moved, now it's faster. So, these are, various dimensions as NGOs, as civil societies, we all need to work together. We had programs like Hriday and Prasad in our country, which did not even talk of ICH. I did a study in Punjab where, the tourism officer said that Amritsar has 1.5 lakh tourists coming every day and their average duration of stay is 1.5 days. And Punjab is so rich in ICH and there were no tours offered at that point of time. I don't know what has happened now, but 10 years back, there was nothing people were offered to go and see. They were just forgotten. So, all these we need to remember and work on. It's a big task. Thank you.
Thank you, wow, Ananya. You gave us a wide range of, understanding at the grassroots level, because there's so much to do, and especially ICH is so community oriented. The work that we do, the ground reality is far from what we, I think, put it on report or such. And thank you for your insight, especially your, talking about the pandemic, because culture was cultural sector was the very first sector which was impacted upon. So that is very important to know. And you have also taken what Dr. Neil has mentioned, that, the learning from ICH and taking it forward. And very true, I totally agree that ICH is so, it's constantly evolving, and that is one of the challenges and also one of the unique, it could be one of its USP in that sense, that it's always constantly evolving. So there are new definitions and so many differentiations amongst that. But when it comes to working at site and at grassroots level, you are doing a phenomenal job. Thank you very much, Ananya. Taking this forward, as mentioned, sustainable development and the 2030 goals that we have. Next, we have our panelist, Gabe Caballero, who is also the focal point of ICOMOS SDGs. The question for you is, Gabe, United Nations Transforming Our World 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development mentions culture as a driving force for sustainable development. In this context, what is the foreseeable strength in intangible cultural heritage to generate means for sustainable development?
Thanks, Saranya, for that question. First of all, I want to thank ICOMOS India and the Emerging Professionals Working Group for inviting me here, and particularly to you for this invitation. It's a great thing that you guys are looking at this, creating a repository of information digitally that is focusing on the South Asian context. I think that's the really the best way to go in thinking about heritage in a very specific perspective. Now, when we think about the UN Agenda 2030, we think about the overall ambitions of the UN for all the countries to provide first the basic needs of removing hunger and providing universal health, education, and removal from poverty. But it also aspires for people to go beyond the basic needs and to better themselves with better choices, gender balance, and removing inequalities, and quality jobs, providing quality jobs. Now, aside from that, we also are thinking of the better standards of living. Mostly this has been focused on cities, but there is also an aspect of how the planet can thrive, particularly both on aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. But the culture and cultural heritage is part of these discussions. SDG 11.4 is particularly discussing on the sustaining of cultural and natural heritage. But we have to think about the SDGs, culture, as two parts. One, it is a driver of sustainable development, which provides a direct role in implementing the SDGs. So this is related to having safe and sustainable cities or decent work and economic growth, reducing of inequalities in the environment, and promoting gender equality and peaceful and inclusive societies. But another component of it is that it is an enabler of sustainable development, which is it has an indirect role to the achievement of the SDGs. For example, food production, right? The agricultural heritage practices that we have contribute to better food for everyone. And let's say heritage has salubrious effects or health benefits, even though when we see natural heritage or cultural heritage, we feel a little bit happier. And I think there are a couple of things that I can highlight, which is related to the intangible cultural heritage. For example, knowledge practices and traditional management systems and stewardship of the land is actually something that can allow for sustainable practices to thrive. And these traditional ideas or knowledge systems that we have can have some key to climate change, to combat climate change. The small villages or agricultural towns that we all know of have some knowledge systems that can be something that can be used for these kinds of discussions. Indigenous people have a certain role of a certain worldview that we have to embrace, and all these are relating to the SDG 13, 14, and 15. And in India, we have this traditional water systems as well, and irrigation systems that are thinking of a different kind of methodology that is very unique to India, right? The creation of cultural life in cities or in towns is unique to each place and provides a unique perspective of the world. Intangible heritage is an anchor to the differentiation of places and the individuality of people. So this is a focus on sustainable cities, SDG 11, SDG 4, but we have to make intangible heritage as an anchor to the lives of people in the cities, because we don't want to have homogeneous places. We want to have a culturally rich cities or towns and cities that we're proud of, and we're part of that culture. Now, the different festivals that we have, the music and performing arts, are also a source of joy, and people come together. And sometimes these kinds of festivals become a tourist attraction and providing economic benefits. And that is related much to the SDG 3 and SDG 12. And traditional crafts are becoming a source of livelihood for people. But the question of evolution and innovation and balancing all the new techniques, Ananya said earlier that, of course, when we look at ICH, we have to think about innovation and transformation. That is really part of the things that we have to look at. And we need to adapt to new realities. So how do we have economic development for traditional crafts, particularly now that we're in the pandemic, right? So another component of ICH is particularly focused on women. The role of women in the cultural sector, and I can commend you today. I think the organizing team is, I think, 95% women, or at least 98. I'm not too sure. But the passing of knowledge from women, from let's say, to their children and the youth, and generating income and in the creative industries is really part of gender equality and SDG 5 and SDG 4. I think I can even see that I think in your organization, really more women are focusing on this kind of work. So when we look at intangible heritage, Ananya has also mentioned earlier, and I will quote some other people as well, that innovations, transformation, and adaptation is quite important. We have to see it beyond saying that one type of, let's say, practice is authentic. It is a living heritage, and we also need to see how things come together. I echoed what Yuka and our other colleagues have mentioned, that we have to see it as a bigger thing, that we cannot just divide tangible, intangible, culture and nature. These are part of the overall culture that we have. And I think that we have to be sensitive about this. Now, lastly, I'm thinking that these kinds of innovations, let's say, can also transform our planet, right? So let's say in the River Ganges, we have this system of religious cleansing of sins, but it also is polluting the River Ganges, right? How can we transform living traditions so that they can become more ecologically sustainable? I think these are questions that the ICH can look at. And how can traditional craftsmen, for example, come together in digital platforms and to reach new audiences? You know, infrastructure development, digital technology is something that ICH can probably come into and then revitalize. And lastly, the benefits of ICH should be shared to indigenous people or to other people who are in the rural areas, not just in the cities, and while maintaining the cultural traditions and of the place. I actually have a question for everyone for the end, but maybe we can discuss later on. But I was thinking with the theme that we have, it focused on historic towns, but the megacities of the world, we have three, I think a couple of megacities in India. But how can heritage or how can intangible heritage and inclusive cities where intangible heritage of various people can be represented? You know, there are migrant communities in different places, and how can that be celebrated? Because this is where most people will be coming into in the next 10 or 15 years, and we have to celebrate intangible heritage there, but creating a place for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. That was a very overarching way that you have put together where ICH actually fits into the SDGs agenda. And especially with your last question, I think we could have an entire new symposium on, you know, the mega cities, urban cities itself, the urban landscapes, historic urban landscapes in that sense. And there are a few key points that you actually mentioned, which is something very valuable to this, that how ICH in digital, right now we are so much immersed in digital, we are doing this also on Zoom. How is that helping the ICH community? The next one was about gender. As you may know, we are actually 98% women in our organizing team, and it was nothing deliberate or anything, but that's how it has evolved, and we are quite happy about it. And so this is something I think on SDG level, the gender equality is something, maybe on the ground reality, it would be something very much differing. This is just one example. So I think most of your points about even especially India, the irrigation systems, and there are diverse traditional knowledge systems within South Asia. Maybe that could be something we can, and you know, further apart from this, that could be something to be looked upon, and for SDGs, they are quite important. Thank you very much, Gabe. With this, we have our next panelist, Hannah John. For her, the question that I have is, from your experience with Jaipur, a UNESCO World Heritage City, what is your view regarding the improvement of the standard of conservation on built heritage through intangible cultural heritage?
Thank you, Sharanya. Before I answer your question, I would just like to say it's an honor to be amongst these co-panelists. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's going to be really hard to follow all these experts, but I'm going to try anyway. My experience with Jaipur has been predominantly in the internal craft streets, so I'm going to be speaking in terms of that. Now, the walled city of Jaipur represents the continuity of a tradition of creativity, which has evolved over the centuries. And ever since its inception, it was envisioned as a center of thriving trade and commerce, for which a heterogeneous population was encouraged, and inviting merchants and bankers and craftsmen from around the country. With intelligent financial policy, like tax concessions and gifts of land. The successors of these traders and craftsmen still live and practice their craft within the walls of Jaipur, and they constitute a significant proportion of the population, which is why Jaipur qualifies as living heritage. The craft neighborhoods are distributed in clusters geographically, and they respond uniquely to the different craft forms in terms of architectural form and layout. Now, this is why I believe that intangible and tangible cultural heritage in Jaipur cannot be dealt with separately. They are intrinsically linked and each can be conserved through the other, but it is also important that a balance is achieved. For what are the streets of Jaipur without its craft forms? Beautiful still, no doubt, but without a soul. The craft forms are what add elements of performance and drama, sprinkled with stimuli that are visual, auditory, olfactory, and tactile. Unfortunately, there is an obvious imbalance at the moment. A review of the conservation and urban renewal initiatives since the 1970s is testament to the fact that the primary focus has been on built heritage and urban infrastructure improvement, and only along the main bazaar streets. Now, not a lot of schemes have percolated to the internal craft streets. The craftsman population is dwindling. More historic workshops are converted into swanky showrooms, many of which are of unrelated trades. Out of the 36 historic crafts that were set up in Jaipur, only 11 survive today. The young population does not want to pursue crafts for a livelihood, and there is insufficient space for craftsmen to work. And a lot of existing environmental laws are pressuring craftsmen to practice outside the walled city in industrial layouts at the outskirts of Jaipur. Now, this is a threat to Criteria 6 of Jaipur's World Heritage Inscription. Now, the question is, how can a balance between conservation of tangible and intangible be achieved? I think we've known the answer for quite a while now, and I strongly believe it is through people-centered approaches. Initiatives by the institutional actors should leave the core community and the historic city resilient. Some examples could be encouraging sustained community participation, creating a sense of stewardship amongst the core community, effective local governance, pilot projects that will eventually demonstrate the potential of heritage-based development to the community. Encouraging research and development and training in low-cost, traditionally appropriate and historically accurate techniques. Encouraging young adults to participate in heritage-related fields. Setting up platforms for business development, linking communities, and encouraging networks for knowledge exchange. Now, having said all this, Jaipur has been at the helm of heritage conservation management in the country, and recent inclusive policy measures such as the Jaipur Walled City Heritage Conservation and Protection Regulations 2020 and the Rajasthan Tourism Policy 2020 take into consideration the internal craft streets, and with area-based plans and diversification of tourism products, etc., which is definitely a step in the right direction. And here's hoping that it will reflect in the lives of the craft community. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. So very well said, especially, the interrelationship between the tangible and the intangible, and also understanding where, Jaipur, the community, the people-centered approaches, as you mentioned, that is definitely very important for Jaipur, because that's one of the cities as far as, on the international spectrum has gained its recognition. So yes, thank you very much for giving us this insight into the ground realities of ICH in Jaipur. The next panelist that I would like to invite is Sukrit Sen. The question for you is, you have a background in music and digital immersive experiences. What is your experience with creating awareness about ICH through through these methods? Over to you.
Thank you, Saranya. I think first of all, I'm really honored, and it's a privilege to be amongst such beautiful panelists, and I'm rather a little tense to be talking amongst such beautiful, amazing people who I look up to. But today I'm going to speak more as a musician, talking about looking at it from an artist's point of view. And what I feel is that the digital wave that has really hit us over, particularly after the pandemic, is definitely a huge driver, but I will still say it's not a solution. Now, if we look back at times when the pandemic hit us, everyone was going out digital. Everyone was trying to express their culture in different ways. The world suddenly seemed to be a smaller space because everyone was out there. Everyone was just, in a click's distance to you. And what I realize is that this entire 1.5 years that we've had, social media has really turned out to be a very, very important an empowering tool, rather, because it's almost like an archive, because everyone's expressing their own culture in different ways from different parts of the world. Even people who were never active on social media, suddenly, due to the lack of human interaction, they're suddenly out on social media and giving out such interesting details. The number of videos I have saved in the last 1 year is more than I've saved in the last 7-8 years. Now, when we talk about putting up videos, putting up your culture, I think something that social media comes up with is trend, something that is trending. Now then we have two sides. And very interestingly, just very recently, I was talking to another fellow musician, Shubh Maharaj, who actually Sonali just showed his family legacy. He's the grandson of Pandit Kishan Maharaj. And he was telling me that, people are so busy following trends that we are forgetting original music, or we are forgetting on original content, because people are just following what people are liking. But I've also realized that in the space where people have come up with their culture and have been appreciated, they have stopped to think that, okay, I had left my tradition to do something else for money, but now when I'm uploading my culture on social media and people are liking it, can this be my profession from next onwards? So this question, this pride, the concept of pride has really improved in the last few months about people's culture. And very interestingly, just recently, I think there was there's a very interesting reality show, Dance India Dance, where people portrayed the Manipuri Krishna Lila. And I was so happy to actually see that there was actually a letter that was sanctioned to Sony TV to say that, we condemn the way Manipuri dance was portrayed in your channel, and we would like to, so that entire concept of pride that is coming for people, and the fact that they are realizing the importance of culture and the importance of putting the right principles of this culture in the right way, I feel this digital platform has played a very, very important role. But now when we come to the next stage, okay, a performer is convinced to be a performer, putting up shows, people are liking it, but will that feed him? Will that, trends end? Dalgona coffee was a huge trend. We suddenly know about this culture from South Korea and Macau, and it ended. Similar for musicians, we put up something, but then how do we continue that? And I think that is where we as heritage managers come in. Ananya ma'am just mentioned, they are doing such wonderful work with Bangla Natok to really empower artists, empower craftsmen, to look into ways by which they can become a part of conventional conversations. And when I say conventional conversations, I will go back to the discourse of parents, where they want their children to be doctors and engineers and not want musicians. And that is the first stage where we place musicians or place artists into a secondary stage where they are not a part of the elite of sorts. But when we listen to the music that they have uploaded over the last few years, music has highly been influenced by nature. They have been talking about aspects of climate change. They have documented rivers through music in different ways, which we as heritage managers often fail to acknowledge or realize. But this entire phase of the lockdown where people came online, it really helped us identify that. Again, a video that went viral very recently was a group of chefs cooking in Kashmir, and they were singing while they were cutting their meat. And when you actually focus on the lyrics of that song, you actually see that what is the kind of meat that you should cut, what is the kind of meat that you shouldn't cut, how is the curation of the meat made. So, I don't want to romanticize it, but these are traditions that have come along. And like Nielsen mentioned, that we have so much to learn from our traditional knowledge. And this digital wave has really helped us acknowledge that and give importance to that entire aspect that has been living for so many years. But we have to really focus on this gap that the digital divide has, which actually has been acknowledged very recently by UNESCO DG Audrey Azoulay, and I will quote her, that we must improve the status of artists and their social protection and address the unequal distribution of value between creators and digital platforms. So we need to understand that how do we financially actually support these artists. Like trends and likings will all go, but if they cannot feed their family, if they cannot feed themselves, there's no point. So we really need to have indicators to understand the well-being of these artists. And I will actually like to refer to a point that Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam had mentioned years back, talking about the National Prosperity Index, where he mentions that the prosperity of a country cannot just be looked at from the GDP, but it has to look from the quality of life plus the value system that these communities have been living upon for these years. So digital platforms, yes, it's been a very, very important factor, very, very important driver. And I do see that this as a very important tool in the future. But we also need to understand that about the life beyond the digital or life with digital, how to empower or how to engage artists in a way that they are financially, independent. So that is what we have to work on. There are many people who are already working on it, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done. So just cutting everything in a very short way. Thank you.
Thank you, Sukrit. Actually, you put it very well. We do not want to create these divisions of, you are a musician, you are a heritage manager. I think it works very well when you have these different hats, when you're working at, the cultural heritage spectrum. So it's very fascinating, as you mentioned, that yes, there is social media, which is quite important even in our professional life. It's one of the mediums of outreach right now, primary means of outreach especially. And also, as you mentioned, that artists or artisans, the way the outreach happens, but what's next? What is beyond that? That is so very critical to understand, that it does not, the buck doesn't stop at the outreach, but what is beyond that? That's the capacity building and the enrichment of life, as you mentioned, quality of life. So thank you very much, Sukrit. The next panelist that I call upon is Anshika Jain. The question for Anshika is, from your experience in Jodhpur, how does performing arts, crafts, as well as the festival ecosystem contribute to tourism as well as economic sustenance of the artist?
So first of all, am I clear, Saranya?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, that's great.
Hear you.
So thank you so much for inviting me. So I'll jump straight to the question. Just a caveat, my inferences come from a pre-COVID period, so they might not be completely valid anymore. And since the question is looks at tourism and economics and ICH, those are the primary areas I'll be looking at, because if I went on about Jodhpur, it will be endless. So when I look at, I would like to connect to what Ananya ma'am said about her observation in Amritsar, about how an average tourist spends just 1.5 days despite the city having so much ICH, because it's not being promoted in a manner appropriate. So my observation has been in a place like Jodhpur or in many other parts of Rajasthan where ICH has a lot of exposure and visibility. A tourist ends up spending much more time, thus helping the economics of the local hotels, taxi drivers, and all those people in the tourism ecosystem. Then secondly, from the tourist perspective, it makes the experience much richer. So besides the tangible which they are going to visit, being able to experience the performing arts of the region, or being able to buy products from made of their traditional crafts, just gives them a much more richer experience and allows them to take their experiences home in a way. And it also helps the money reach the local community very directly, because otherwise what is termed as tourist dollars usually end up with hotel chains or taxi chains, chains, which might not always have a local connect, or which might have a partial local connect. But with the case of ICH practitioners, it does end up in the hands of the local community more often than not. And another point which I have observed with regards to the artisans is that a lot of we like the idea of artisans, keeping their art pure and still working in the way they did in the past. But we also have to realize that in the past few decades, their traditional networks and the traditional systems have slowly disappeared or collapsed. So a lot of performing artisans from that area, like dhari singers or dhari musicians, who used to work on a barter system with certain communities, that practice has collapsed. They would no longer can afford to live like that okay, you go and perform for a certain community at important events and get grain and other stuff from them, and tourism helps them sustain themselves. And this has also helped upend your caste dynamics. And this is something I've observed not only in Jodhpur but even Kutch, that a lot of times when you look at artisans communities, they fall on the lower end of the caste spectrum, and they always have this kind of a my-bap relation with other communities. But with tourism, that no longer that has reduced, and you see a much more equitable or a higher status provided to the artisans and performing communities. So that's all I have to say on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Anshika. Actually, you gave us quite a different perspective also to what, performing artists and the festival ecosystem, how it works. Because even though we talk about the multicultural aspect of country, but within the, the microcosm of each of the cities or regions, we have so many layers in itself, and that itself makes it richer. So there's so much to learn, and on ground reality, we can, I think, as heritage manager yourself, you have worked with them and you have known, because understanding community, we just put it under the label of community, but within that, there is so much layering itself. So that's very interesting. And especially as you mentioned, the transformation of the, how artists or artisans are perceived now and what was earlier. That's quite nice. Thanks, Anshika. The next panelist that I invite is Priyanka Singh. And the question for Priyanka is, discourse about intangible cultural heritage is affixed on the question of memory. From your experience of working in Amritsar, what is your view of heritage memories in context of ICH and their significance that is attributed to the site through its cultural, social, and religious importance? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Saranya, for having me. And it's such an honor to be part of this esteemed panel. I'm going to dive straight into the question because I have a relatively long-winded answer. So, in terms of Amritsar, there's so much to say on its living heritage. And I want to set the context to the varied expressions of ICH in the city. From its many crafts and its place in history as an important trading town, to the practice of seva, the spirit of service that many may be aware of, which is embodied in all Sikh practices throughout the diaspora, but particularly seen at Harmandir Sahib, the holiest of the Sikh shrines, more commonly known as the Golden Temple. I also want to underscore that the city is unique in that it's situated near the India-Pakistan border and saw a mass exodus of people and linked migration to the city during the partition in 1947. Now, this really sets the context to your question on memory and ICH. So I'd like to demonstrate how memory association is essential to anchoring people's relationships to a site or a tangible space in a rural or an urban fabric, and thereby the lives that they live. And I'll do this with a specific example of Rambagh in Amritsar. Built in the 1800s, the design for Rambagh was inspired by the Persian Charbagh, a quadrilateral garden layout that many of us would be familiar with walkways, water channels based on the four gardens of paradise that the Quran mentions. Now, the garden houses at its very center what was the summer palace of one of the most celebrated rulers of undivided Punjab, Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Now, more than 10 years ago, during one of my first interactions with the site, until recently, the garden is known not by its association to Maharaja Ranjit Singh, but rather known by locals as Company Bagh, a reference to the East India Company that took over the Bagh in the late 1800s. Now, this has come about because there was a deliberate act of to desecrate the memory of the Maharaja and thereby the associated notions of Punjabi pride and valor. And so the outer boundary of the garden was demolished. Moreover, a tar circular road connecting the center points of each edge of the square of the Charbagh was built to further desecrate any recognizable form of the Charbagh from memory. Now, in the century that's followed, the garden was incorporated into a larger area, faced overdevelopment with multiple government authorities laying claim to it, and the space and constructions were galore, leading to the water channels being defunct, planted all over with invasive plant species, which are easy to plant and sort of grow easily. Now, with the garden, the focus of the work that we've done over the past decade or so through my association with CRCI was to recover the footprint of the Charbagh, one quadrant at a time, not only for its physical form, but as an attempt to reclaim the knowledge of nature of planting of indigenous species, such as the colorful flowering and fruit-bearing trees that would have existed in the Charbagh, developing a water management plan responsive to that. And to no surprise, the first few surveys that we did, the Archaeological Survey of India sent representatives from the Horticulture Department to assist us in doing this. Now, the legacy of Maharaja Ranjit Singh as an important figure in history exists as a notion in the minds of the people of Amritsar and Punjab. But with the Summer Palace and its conservation and adaptive reuse as a museum to him, it attempts to reclaim his memory, not only in the abstract, but valorize his legacy by anchoring it in a physical space for commemoration. Now, these need to be seen in the very notions, in the context of the very notions of self-identity and identity and legacies of the Punjabi people who see it mirrored in their material fabric, centered around decolonizing certain narratives and spaces in cities. Moreover, the master plan of Amritsar, in all its iterations over every few years, keeps highlighting that Amritsar is a city with extremely limited green open spaces. So it also serves as an aspiration for a better quality of urban life that places value to open and green spaces and celebrates knowledge of indigenous plant species, water management, and landscape, which contribute more to a sustainable future. That brings me to an end here. So
Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, Priyanka. That was excellent. Actually, you gave us the context of, we have been just talking about it, that, tangible and intangible is interlinked, but you gave us an example of, ground reality, how important it is, especially when it comes to memories, people memory, the community's memories of these stories and its linkages. It's very important on when you are actually practically working on a project. Thank you for actually sharing this example. We move on to our last panelist now, Ms. Ritika Khanna. The question for Ritika is with respect to nomination of World Heritage Sites, how divisive is criteria 6, which is not standalone, and also share some insight on the measures of the government to safeguard ICH. Over to you, Ritika.
Thank you so much, Saranya, and thank you for the important questions. I'm glad to be contributing to this very important forum. So when we talk of criterion 6 of the World Heritage Convention, I would firstly like to point out that while all criteria are equally important, criterion 6 becomes special because this is where the interdependent nature of tangible and intangible in cultural heritage, and in particular in the concept of world heritage, is most apparent. Also, as we have been talking about attributes and values, it is the attributes and values of a property that give shape to its outstanding universal value. And most of us would know that outstanding universal value is the underlining factor of the World Heritage Convention. So it is important to know that these attributes are highly vested in the whole concept of being intangible. To give you just a few examples, be it human creative genius of criterion 1, or interchange of human values of criterion 2. The basic idea behind the attributes is intangible, and it is the physical manifestation of this intangible that we see in the built fabric. This makes criterion 1 all the more important because it is criterion 6 that provides the most fertile ground to see how intangible values can be directly translated into the physical fabric. Now, with reference to the operational guidelines of the World Heritage Convention, criterion 6 reads as to be directly or tangibly associated with events or living traditions, with ideas or with beliefs, with artistic and literary works of outstanding universal significance. Now, it doesn't end here. Those who have seen the operational guidelines would have also seen that there is a little bracket, there's a sentence next to criterion 6, which goes on as the committee considers that this criterion should preferably be used in conjunction with other criteria. It is the word preferably that brings in some ambiguity to the implementation of this criterion. The moment one say that this is a preference, we understand that this is not a compulsion. This is only a preference. So this way, if we read between the lines, we will realize that criterion 6 is not necessarily a standalone criterion. It just comes across as that because it is a preference of the World Heritage Committee. So the question to ask is, why is this a preference? And should there be efforts to change this preference? And if we do look into the over 1,150 properties inscribed on the World Heritage List, there are 12 properties which are only inscribed under criterion 6. And some of those include Apravasi Ghat at Mauritius, Auschwitz concentration camp of Poland, the Hiroshima Peace Memorial of Japan. So if I were to put it in the context of today's theme, that is reflections in ground realities, it would be safe to say that due to not enough emphasis being made on criterion 6, its potential in the whole concept of world heritage and outstanding universal value has been underutilized so far, to an extent that it seems like the World Heritage Convention only makes a passing reference to intangible heritage. I'll end my intervention on criterion 6 with these thoughts and questions for further discussion. And coming to your question on what the government of India, what initiatives has the government of India been taking to safeguard intangible heritage, it's my honor to be a little part of the Ministry of Culture as a consultant on UNESCO matters. So I know from my experience so far of about 2 years working in the government that the Ministry of Culture works towards safeguarding and promoting different forms of intangible cultural heritage through its various academies, such as the Sangeet Natak Academy, which is for music and performing arts, Sahitya Academy, which is for literature. Then we have National School of Drama, which is well known for theatre. Apart from that, I'm also aware that in 2013, the ministry had also launched the scheme for safeguarding the intangible cultural heritage and diverse cultural traditions of India, which lets institutions, groups, NGOs, and independent individuals and scholars as well to share their research proposals towards safeguarding intangible cultural heritage. And last year in April 2020, the ministry had also formulated a national list of intangible cultural heritage, which is still in its draft format. But in that, the findings of the scheme of safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage were taken, and over 100 intangible cultural heritage items were inventorized, and it is a work in progress, and it is there on the ministry's website. In addition to that, I would also encourage everyone to go through the periodic reporting of the 2005 Convention on Protection and Promotion of Diversity of Cultural Expressions, where the various initiatives of the government have been listed, not only on intangible cultural heritage, but towards protection and promotion of diversity of cultural expression. So it includes a larger umbrella of digital heritage, mobility of artists, and so on. So I hope I have been able to answer your question, Saranya, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you very much, Ritika. That was very insightful, honestly speaking, as you know, that's the general perception of Criteria 6, that it's always seen as a standalone, but you gave us a very different perspective, and thank you very much for that. And also giving us an understanding of all the, what is happening within the government sector on ICH. Thank you very much. With this, to conclude, I would just want to call upon all our panelists. I just want to have one question, and which, as the time is very limited, if you can just give me a word or two, if that would be possible, then we can conclude this session. The question is, one of the biggest challenges on ground reality that you have faced while working on ICH. Just a word or two, that would be great. Thank you. Over to you all. If Sukrit, would you want to go first? I can see you first on my screen.
I think everyone's discussed about ground realities and the issues that are there, but we need to, like, I think as heritage professionals, we need to think beyond the emotional quotient that we always have for art and artists, and really think beyond that and actually involve proper financial, economics has to play a very important role in whatever suggestion we do, because thinking about culture will not feed my family. So that is all I have to say. So economic principles have to come in very, very strongly in whatever
Sure.
like whatever way forward we take.
Agreed. Thank you, Sukrit. Over to you, Mr. Rodwell.
I would simply say that the discussion is, and has been for a long time, to my perception, too limited. The discussion that took place before 2015 was about introducing culture as the driver for sustainable development, not cultural heritage, but culture. The problem that academia has, and I've discussed this with many people, is that they cannot define culture. They can define cultural heritage and they can split it into tangible and intangible, but culture is too difficult because it's too embracing. It covers everything. Culture is not about the arts and humanity. Culture is about human beings. It's about science. If you look at the origins of the world culture, they're in cultivation. They're in agriculture, horticulture, every kind of culture to do with growth. They are not fixed on arts and humanity. And what's really disappointing to me is that when we talk about the cultural heritage, which to me is the wrong starting point, in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals, everybody focuses on 11.4. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Culture, with human beings behind it, infuses every single one of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And we've missed the target. We've lost the opportunity. We need to recover it. So that's my last contribution.
Thank you very much. As I understand, it's actually the understanding of culture itself is quite a challenge for us. Moving on to Dr. Imon, over to you.
Well, previously I talked about collaboration or cooperation between people, experts in different regions. This time I'll talk about, I'll highlight the importance of cross-disciplinary approach to this, because we are talking about people, and most of us are here architects. We probably are not well trained in dealing with sociological issues or anthropological issues. So, but it's not that we can't contribute, but it's very important to have anthropologists, sociologists, economists, urban planners. So, I mean, this is an issue that touches almost everything that we do and the way we live. So, and with the climate change, coming to the picture, the importance of scientists' involvement in everything, in the process is actually paramount. So I will highlight that point, that it's very important to have a more multidisciplinary or cross-disciplinary approach to ICH and cultural heritage.
Thank you, Dr. Mohan. Yes, multicultural approach. And as you clearly mentioned, yes, we all are mostly architects on this panel. The next, over to you, Dr. Neil.
Hi, Saranya. I'm sorry, I lost my connection. Could you repeat what was going on?
Okay, so we were just concluding the session with discussing about what is one of the biggest challenge when it comes to ICH and ground reality, from your perspective.
Okay, I think to me, I think this is not so different than what Dennis earlier said or was hinting. I think the biggest challenge for us is to ensure that we don't fall into trap created by some global instruments or these constructed divisions. However, having said that, I would also recognize that we have to work with the given systems. We can't just change the world, right? And so, for example, we at Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University, we're organizing an ICH workshop in 2 months' time. Again, we are organizing another workshop on ICH. But how do we get out of the trap? Within that workshop, we are emphasizing again the same message that, okay, this is not about the division. This is about using this perspective to get into the nuances and really highlight what has been missed out in the past decades. And then therefore we are using the term ICH, but not to emphasize that, oh, ICH is the wonderful, and then now this is the new paradigm, it's not about, so it's not that. So I think the biggest challenge is to, how do we, since I can imagine, just like the SDG issue that Dennis pointed, SDG 2030 is the goal now. I'm sure we'll come up with another term after 2025, and then that will be, another discourse. So, but that is a process, that will go. So the key thing is to not to get into the trap and stuck to the ICH as a terminology, but understand why that terminology came about and what it is trying to achieve, and really moved on. Like many of the panelists, including Sukrit highlighted, the digital is an opportunity, but then how do you move on by recognizing the gaps there? The cases from Jaipur, Sonali and Ansika also mentioned, these dimensions we have to highlight, but let's not caught up with the dimension itself. Dimension is just one part of the entire object or entire concept. So I think that is a major challenge. How do we intellectually evolve from this trap that is there, which is perhaps a necessary evil to our evolution of heritage discourse? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neil. Over to you, Ms. Ananya.
Yeah, I think, the biggest challenge is, while we all are saying that ICH can play a role as a driver of sustainable development, it is totally missing in our policy and programming. And a big reason is the lack of data. In India, we don't know how many weavers we have, for example. So, I think, and similarly, we have so many lovely examples all across South Asia on how ICH has empowered people, but we don't have all that in a form where it can be an evidence to negotiate for the SDGs, which will be defined after 2030, So this is a huge challenge in my opinion.
Thank you, Ananya. Over to you, Gabe.
Sorry, can you hear me? I think I have the catch-all conversation here that it's also all focusing on the SDGs, but let me give some my points on this matter. So with regards to what Dennis has mentioned, I agree that this whole idea of culture and cultural heritage is a little bit abstract, because of the whole way that this political agenda has moved. before 2015, there was actually a push to put in culture as part of the SDGs. But Dennis is right; it was too difficult to put that in because of the so many complexities of what is defined as culture. And if you look at many of the documents, culture and cultural heritage are like somewhat interchanged in many of the discussions. But I think cultural heritage is being defined as both intangible and tangible heritage. So that's why this is being mixed up. But you have also the cultural economies and creative economies that are not in that kind of discussion, right? So I think the whole discourse needs to be let's say refined further, and perhaps in after 2030, then there'll be another push to put that in and see how that goes. Now, one of the issues that Iman raised with regards to being equipped to the discussions, right? We have to also acknowledge that we need to collaborate with other people. It was mentioned that most people are architects. I had a discussion with an archaeologist who recently we had a debate on how do you really affect people on the ground. And he said to me, we had a long discussion on saying that, how do you really provide benefits to people? And the answer is economic development, right? If the person who is the craftsman does not have any means of equipping himself to become a better entrepreneur, then we are failing in that attempt. And that is, and we cannot provide the training. There are people who are knowledgeable on business skills. There are people who are knowledgeable on, let's say, microfinance that will be able to transform that person to become more knowledgeable on extending his knowledge of intangible heritage. So I think I go back to that kind of, let's say Neil was saying about training for professionals. We need to train. We need to also have partnerships with other colleagues who are more familiar. And then that is the way that we can impact other people's lives and make it more relevant on the ground, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Gabe. Over to you, Priyanka.
So I know the entire discussion has sort of underscored many perspectives, approaches, thoughts, and what we're also realizing is that while there are a lot of good ideas, but there are a lot of flawed ideas that we work with. And that sort of brings into question our role as conservation professionals, as facilitators, of how equipped are we as facilitators is the sort of biggest challenge here. Because with that role, we have to ensure that practitioners of ICH and the communities have the agency to determine the future of their own living heritage. And our whole approach needs to be, while we talk about financial empowerment, there are other sort of facets which also look at social empowerment, where, particularly in India with craft-based industries and sort of professions, there's also an association that comes with perhaps caste-based professions as well. And therefore, sometimes it's not the financial imperative, but it's also how in society their social status is affected by what they do. And so we need to look at it from a wide range of rights-based approaches, looking at financial empowerment, social empowerment, but sort of anchored in questioning our ability as facilitators as well. And do we have all the tools, and therefore ensuring that we're not speaking on behalf of someone, but we're creating enough and safeguarding a platform so that practitioners and communities have the agency to speak for themselves.
Thank you, Priyanka. Over to you, Hannah.
Well, perhaps something a little more general. I think it's really difficult to work with people on the ground when there is a lack of dissemination of information, when people don't know that, for example, in Jaipur, most of the craftsmen I interviewed did not know that it was a World Heritage Site. So what are the benefits, of what entails, what comes up with that inscription, and what kind of support is available to them, and what are the tools that they could have access to, and trying to convince them that investing in their heritage is worthwhile, and that if they don't act soon, then it'll probably be too late. So I think that is a very big challenge when you're dealing with such dense historic cities.
Thank you, Hannah. Over to you, Ritika.
Thanks, Saranya. So one thought that has been resonating with me is that the ground realities are going to change, and they have been constantly changing from being in the past where people barely had any knowledge of heritage as a field and intangible cultural heritage as practices that must be preserved, to now where we do have opportunities of interacting in a forum like this. So it is very important for us to realize that ground reality is going to change in future as well. So we need to constantly critically reflect on the profession of heritage and how it is evolving, and our role as professionals, and how we can make it evolve, and we can witness better ground realities in future. So critical reflection on the field and on this topic that we've been talking about, the interdependence of tangible and intangible, is essential. Thank you.
Thank you. That was excellent. I mean, I just got so many ideas and perspectives about ICH, from the lack of economy, how are we going to get microfinances, social entrepreneurship. The basic definition of even ICH is something is still evolving as ICH evolves, or just talking and discussing about the cultural profession itself, that critiquing the work that we do and how we do, and the multidisciplinary teams that we need to work with, because these are things that is very realistic, because when we start working on ground, these are things that actually something that we have to go hand in hand and look into how we can make this better. With this, now I conclude this panel discussion. I'm so glad that we could bring in the expert and emerging voices in ICH. ICH being a growing sector within the cultural heritage spectrum, this panel discussion has raised some very interesting questions, as well as given us insight into the practicalities and ground realities of ICH. As they say, learning never stops. And we at E-commerce India hope to have many more such events, fostering intergenerational learning and multicultural scientific dialogue. Thank you to each one of you for sharing your experiences in ICH. I, for one, truly hope this discussion it continues beyond this e-symposium. And to make this happen, we need to know the way forward. Our next presenter is Mrinalini Atre. She is the NSC ICH coordinator of E-commerce India, member of ICICH, and the e-symposium organizer. Over to you, Mrinalini. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Saranya. Good evening to you all. As the coordinator of the NSC ICH, I welcome all the experts, panelists, and distinguished guests for this concluding session of the symposium. I also take this opportunity to thank all those who have contributed to the making of this series as an expert, as a panelist, participant, institutional partners, and members of the organizing team. Thank you all. The presentations from the experts and the valuable inputs from the participants have helped us to accomplish much that we intended to achieve through this symposium. However, there are still many milestones which we need to achieve in this dialogue between the historic towns and the ICH, the gaps that need to be taken care of. So another journey starts from here. That is the way forward. Yes, through this dialogue which was spread over the 4 thematic sessions in the last 2 months, we have looked into the shared spaces between the different cultural groups within the historic towns. We have also understood that there has been a mix of communities' tangible and intangible heritage, and which is part of the current heritage practice. All that knowledge which has been gathered through these thematic sessions also need to be consolidated further in the form of, number one, the publication of the proceedings. So this is going to be a collaborative work of ICOMOS India and Center for Heritage Management, Ahmedabad University. And this proceeding or this book form will not only include articles from the experts, but it would also have write-ups from the moderators and the rapporteurs on the respective thematic sessions which they had handled. Along with that, we are also going to put up the conversations, that is the important inputs which we received from the participants. Second major thing or way forward is bringing out a statement from South Asia, a kind of a pre-policy document with respect to how we define the scope of tangible and intangible in context of historic towns in South Asia. We also know that the thematic sessions provided a glimpse of extensive research work which is being done with regard to intangible heritage and the challenges and the opportunities for its management in South Asia. And this statement needs to reflect on the outcome of this research as well. We also know that managing tourism in historic towns is critical, but the need of the time is sustainable tourism so that these towns can have continuity of heritage, especially their ICH elements. This also needs a comprehensive policy formulation from the respective governments in South Asian context. How can we help here? Further, we have many gaps in the national policies on culture, tourism, museums, and this also need to be addressed through this document. Moreover, the measures for safeguarding creative economy of the historic towns also needs to be looked in. And this would lay down the directions and establish methodologies for the younger generations who are going to work on the historic towns. Moreover, this would also act as a guide for future studies on historic towns with the following considerations. That is, number one, how to contextualize the existing tools by incorporating local perspectives. This is something which has been going on in all the thematic sessions. Secondly, decolonizing established concepts and theories on heritage conservation and how to include the perspectives, local perspectives on intangible heritage from South Asia. And this would also require us to question, should we depend on Western paradigms? And how can we establish local or Asian paradigms in ICH core? Then, how to set up transgenerational links with our younger professionals to ensure their participation and contribution to this discourse. Another thing is that we also need to ensure that the conservation and management systems which are being employed at the historic towns also should aim at safeguarding the intangible heritage of those towns. Because in most of the cases, what we find is that local communities in South Asia are less aware of their intangible heritage. So how do we bring in the community participation in safeguarding of intangible heritage in the historic towns? The intellectual property rights and territorial rights of the communities living in the historic towns also needs to be recognized and respected as per the ICH Charter. But how? So we need to look into this aspect as well. And last but not the least, we also need to find a way of sustaining coexistence between the tangible and the intangible so that we can discourage the approach of divide and rule or creating the artificial divisions of tangible and intangible. So keeping all these things in view, and these are the outcomes which have been there throughout the series, which we have the thematic series. And therefore, I request the President ICOMOS India Naveen Piplani, to organize a conclave or a workshop where we have an assemblage of experts, ECOMOS representatives from all South Asian nations, to brainstorm all these outcomes and lead to the drafting of the statement from South Asia, which would be a kind of a pre-policy statement. And in this regard, we would also solicit the participation of NSC Historic Towns and Villages, which is already doing extensive work on it. They had many webinars on this. I may also submit that as it is concerned with intangible heritage, it would be good if we bring in ICH and do this workshop in partnership with EKH. Thank you. Thank you, Saranya. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Mrinalini, for sharing this, and we are very much looking forward to the realization of the way forward. Next, we have the concluding remarks from Mr. Manish Pandit, President ICICH, ECOMOS, Director and Principal Conservation Architect. And over to you, Manish, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Saranya, and my compliments to everyone who organized this wonderful session. In fact, there were a series of sessions you people have organized, and I'm very happy that intangible cultural heritage and the kind of interest the young group has taken into it, it's very encouraging. In fact, in the past couple of our International Council meeting, we were actually working out policies of how we can encourage and involve younger population into the system and take the intangible cultural heritage at a wider spectrum. And perhaps I believe that India can take a very good lead into it. We are also encouraging the young professionals to be part of the ISC, ICH, and be part and be active in that. So all those people who are interested, please, you are most welcome to put your applications forward for that. And I'm very much intrigued with the whole conversation throughout past more than 2 hours or so. And the kind of concerns which are being discussed here, or the ideas which I am finding here, are something which we are at par with the International Scientific Committee also. And in past 2 months, we have conducted several regional discussions or regional meetings of EKH members. And the basic idea was perhaps is the same as there is a regional identity and similarities or overlaps. And that is where we all can come together and discuss at the common platforms, because I'm sure enough that there are challenges in the protection or propagation of ICH, in understanding of ICH, which needs the same kind of a wavelength. And when we are able to work out some kind of commonalities and approach to overcome such challenges, that is where we can take it further at a global level also. And very much I'm also of the opinion that we cannot have universal rules which can apply on all the people or of the globe at the same time. So there has to be some kind of diversity into it. And that is where perhaps all the UNESCO charters or whatever things which we are looking at, movement will start making it more global, and all that they become lesser effective in terms of, because they have to include too many things into it. Interestingly, I think there was a discussion on World Heritage Sites and Criteria 6, which is quite a dear topic to me. And as it was understood very commonly that Criteria 6 only is an associated criteria and it's not a standalone criteria. But there are 12 sites, as it was said. And at the same time, another problem which is there, it's only 20% of the World Heritage sites have criteria 6. And even if we look at any World Heritage site nominated in India, the stories and the value systems we are talking about primarily comes from the intangible cultural heritage, which is associated with that particular site. But surprisingly, criteria 6 is missing in the nomination. So this is something which we really need to look into it, because this is this is something which is leading into the periodic reporting also. And unfortunately, in the periodic reporting, there is no mechanism as of today in World Heritage where criteria 6 is evaluated, or there are any kind of benchmarks or kind of nodes where they evaluate that whether in periodic reporting this criteria has deteriorated or upgraded or maintained and things like that. And this approach we really need to consider seriously, because this is something, my personal belief is intangible cultural heritage is something you cannot see in its only as an independent body. And it, as most of your speakers here also said, that this divide and rule policy should not be there. It is as simple as body and soul, you say, or it is intrinsically linked with the built heritage. It's inseparable. So we have to consider intangible as a part of the tangible heritage, especially when we are looking only as a part of monuments. When we come onto the part of the city, then it is vice versa, that the culture actually dominates and the city develops around it. So there again, we cannot say that any specific city became World Heritage because it has architectural ensemble of buildings. It is basically that culture and the of the city which actually demands that kind of ensemble and or brought up that kind of an ensemble, and that's why the OUV of that city is because of that culture and not only primarily because of that built heritage. And perhaps that's where 1972 convention, which is very much oriented towards architecture or grandeur of architecture, was focused on. And believe me, if you see the kind of buildings or properties were listed in the World Heritage up to 1985 or even up to 1990s, you can understand the kind of approach the committees or the professional had. But towards the good part, in the past 2 decades, definitely things are changing. And I look forward that such kind of development will bring in more cultural aspects, the intangible cultural heritage, intrigued with the built heritage also. Another thing which I definitely would like to emphasize and would like to be part of it is the regional cooperation. My compliments to Mrinalini also and ICOMOS India and all other partners to it, that this particular kind of workshop was seminars and conclaves were organized. And I do agree with Mrinalini that we should have a conclave on and generate a kind of a statement on creating guiding principles or kind of a toolkit for comprehending ICH or the way forward for taking this ICH at a different level. Definitely, ICH as a international scientific committee would like to be part of it. We will be happy to provide whatever support required from our side and to take it further in the international forum. The intangible cultural heritage, the things which we definitely want is the mechanism in which it is identified, acknowledged, understood, and respected. So these things we need to ensure that unless we have these intangible cultural heritages, it's not just identification, but it is how we can understand and respect the same. Also, I heard we are talking about the ecosystems, both cultural and natural, and this is interesting part of it. The dynamics of ICH is very, very important. We need to understand that we cannot freeze it at any specific level, whether it is crafts, whether it is any other element of ICH. We may document it, but again, documenting ICH is a process, and it cannot be that I documented something in 1990s and today I will start saying that, you know, this ICH is wrongly being presented. This is how it has to be presented. Because it's dynamic into 2 decades, it may have its changes, it may have its continuity. Continuity is something which is the primary aspect we'll always look at in its survival. And if we have that, we ensure that the ICH will continue. And obviously for that particular continuity, we may have peripheral or secondary considerations, like whether it's related to economics, whether it is related to development, or whether it is related to pride or social upbringing. You know, all those things are related, and and I'm sure that this is not just the piece of cake for architects, but it is for the community, and the multidisciplinary teams are required if you really need to intervene into it. And I think I closed my talk here, and thank you very much for inviting me. And I can assure you full cooperation from ICH, the International Scientific Committee of ICOMOS on Intangible Cultural Heritage. And we look forward for the conclave and other similar instruments to promote, to have more discussions and discourses on intangible cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manish, to conclude this e-symposium. And to give the vote of thanks, I will invite now Ms. Niyati Jigyasu. The floor is yours, Niyati. Niyati, can you unmute yourself?
Okay. Yeah, so sorry, I was just saying that it was a very interesting session, and I think there were so many insights that I will, might have to go back to Facebook and relook at the entire session to actually, get everything in. So, but for such a series of symposium sessions and this level of event, I think it's very important to say thank you to where it is due to so many people who have been helping us at various levels. And that's why I think I would start by saying thank you to the ICOMOS India, especially the executive committee, because we have been really bothering them with so many support help, and Naveen Piplani for always encouraging to doing work, this kind of activities, Dr. Reema Ahuja, Vice President, Shalini Dasgupta with all the support, with all the conduct of this, Lipika Khanna always there whatever time of the day or night, Munish Pandit for his support with as a President ICICH, because that is a very very important for our NSC. Other members of the Commerce India across NSCs who have been, participating, who have been giving us feedback, who have been part of discussions or even as speakers, as experts. Special thanks I have to give to Dr. Rohit Jigyasu, because he was the one who actually helped us with most of the contacts of the speakers, and wherever we were in problem in some places. So all our esteemed speakers, because there's so many of them across the sessions, I think I can never thank them enough. It's because to accept our invite at the first go, just I never got any no from anybody, and I'm really eternally grateful to everybody. And our moderators, Poonam, Rohit, Ishita, Saranya, Zarna, for being there in all the sessions. our team, which was led by Dr. Mrinalini Atre, Monalisa, who has been very important for the conduct also, as well as organizing. Saranya Dashini, who has been, a very important source for helping us with all this organizing part. Meenal, who has been the backbone of all the data source and has been, with all the presenters for, details and everything. Our reporters, Aditi Rai, Kritika Mohan, Lakshmi R, Nigar Sheikh, who have been very important for all the sessions, and Sukrit, you would be seeing the videos, the music that you have listened to, that's all part of his work and expertise. Sukanya Sharma, Varsha, also for the lot of support that we needed as far as screenshots, media, and a lot of other things are concerned. These posters that you see, the part which you see next to mine, and the other posters that you've seen over the time, that has been done by Zarna. So I think but there is no enough thank you to everybody, but still thank you so very much for being part of this entire journey, and we will continue from here on. So this is just the beginning. I would end it with that. Thank you so much.